Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now, we begin. My name is Antonio, and I never considered myself someone superstitious. I work as a freelance photographer, and I love exploring abandoned and forgotten places. Sometimes I get lost for hours, or even days, looking to capture the essence of those forgotten corners, those places that people have left behind. The story of what happened to me began during one of those excursions in a rural area of Northern California. I was looking for a church that, according to local rumors, had been abandoned more than half a century ago. No one dared to approach it, but that only increased my curiosity. It was a hot day in early August when I decided to follow my instinct. I was exploring a terrain on the outskirts of a town called St. Teresa. It was a small place, almost invisible to those who only pass by the main highway. That town was surrounded by a sea of vegetation and mountains that isolated it from everything else. The air was heavy, charged with humidity, and there wasn't a single soul in sight. After walking for a couple of hours along a dirt road full of undergrowth and thorns, I found what I had come to look for. A church in ruins, made of gray stone with collapsed roofs. At first, I didn't give it much importance. It was an old construction, a vestige of another time, something that seemed to have been forgotten by society. What caught my attention most was its location. It was completely isolated, surrounded by a thick forest of pines that hid it from view. I sat near the entrance and took out my camera. My objective was to take some good shots for a personal project about abandoned buildings. The church walls had graffiti, marks from people who had surely gone there before me, and the atmosphere was strange, but not enough to worry me. Just a sensation of deep abandonment, as if the place were waiting to be forgotten. Several hours passed, and I began to realize that the sun was already descending and the light was becoming dimmer. It was time to return, but something made me stay a little longer. I felt a strange curiosity, as if something were calling me from inside the church. I entered the building with the sound of my boots echoing against the stone floor. There was nothing but dust and debris, and darkness was beginning to take over the walls. I sat near what had once been an altar, looking at the broken saint figures and the wood that no longer seemed to support anything. Despite the quietude of the place, something made me feel uncomfortable. I didn't know if it was the absolute silence or the strange marks I had seen on the exterior walls, as if someone had tried to draw strange symbols on the stone. At first I thought they were simple scratches, but upon looking at them more closely, I realized they didn't seem random. There was something dark in them, something I couldn't identify, but that provoked a slight chill. I decided it was time to leave and stood up, ready to exit. However, when I tried to return the way I had come, I realized that the path I had taken to reach the church was not in sight. I looked around, and although the church was right in front of me, I couldn't find the trail that had brought me there. Somehow the forest seemed denser, more impenetrable. The air that had been warm before had now become thick, and I felt a slight pressure in my chest, as if something were watching me. I tried to walk toward where I remembered the path was, but after taking a few steps, I realized that the landscape, no longer seemed familiar to me. The shadows of the forest lengthened in a strange way, and the tree branches seemed to move without the wind touching them. My first impulse was to return to the church, but as I did so, the building began to move away from me. There was no doubt. The place seemed to be changing, as if the distance between me and the church increased with each step. Fear began to grow inside me. I felt a strange pressure in my stomach, as if the jungle itself were closing in on me. I looked toward the sky, but the sun had completely disappeared, and darkness was beginning to be total. Something wasn't right. My mind began to make connections, and suddenly I remembered the rumors I had heard in the town. Stories about the church and the place. No one wanted to talk about it, but I had heard whispers about disappearances, about people who had ventured into the jungle and never returned. I quickened my pace, beginning to panic. Every time I thought I was approaching the exit, something changed. The trees became denser, the paths narrower. There wasn't a single sound, not a single animal in sight. The air was dense, heavy, as if time itself were stopped. And then, in the middle of that stillness, I heard it, a low murmur, a whisper almost imperceptible that seemed to come from the trees. At first I thought it was the wind, but I soon realized it wasn't. I stopped, my breathing accelerated. What's happening? I asked myself, but I had no answer. I decided to return to the church, but something strange happened. Every step I took moved me further away from it. I walked in circles, but I never managed to find the path that would have brought me there. Instead of advancing, it seemed like the landscape was reconfiguring itself, as if the jungle were moving around me. Suddenly, the vision of the church completely vanished. There was no trace of it. Only the trees, the mist, and the darkness remained. By that point, the sensation of desperation began to chill me to the bone. My mind began to formulate terrifying ideas. I was trapped in a labyrinth. There was something in that church, something in that place that wouldn't let me go. It was all part of an ancient curse, a spell that had been cast over this place to keep the unwary trapped. In my mind, questions multiplied, but answers vanished with each step I took. The sensation of being watched, of not being alone, became stronger and stronger. Something in the trees, in the ground, in the air told me I shouldn't be there, that I had ventured into something much bigger than I imagined. Finally, desperation overcame me. I began to scream, calling for help, but my voice was lost in the air as if the place itself swallowed my words. My vision began to blur, not from darkness, but from a sensation of disorientation that completely enveloped me. I don't know how much time passed, whether it was hours or days, but when I finally woke up, I was lying on the ground just outside the church. The place seemed as peaceful as at the beginning, but I no longer felt well. I got up slowly, with the sensation that something had changed in me. I didn't know if I had been dreaming or if everything I lived was real, but upon looking around, I realized that the path that had previously taken me away from the church was now clearly visible. The jungle, the darkness, everything seemed to be in its place. I returned to the town as if it were a dream from which I could never wake up. No one asked me about my experience. The rumors about the church, although they still persisted, remained just whispers among the inhabitants. No one spoke clearly about what really happened in that place, but I knew. I knew there was something beyond the trees, something beyond what my eyes could see. And although I never approached that church again, I could never stop feeling that somehow the jungle had marked my destiny. Every time I pass near a forest or an isolated area, something stops me, as if the shadow of that abandoned church were following me, waiting for me to someday return to reclaim me again. And although logic tells me that everything was a product of my mind, I can't stop feeling that something, in some corner of that place, is still waiting for me. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. But if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. My name is Mariana Sarrett. I'm 39 years old, from San Antonio, Texas, and until a year ago, I worked as a graphic designer for an architecture firm in Austin. It wasn't a bad job, but after the pandemic lockdown, something in me changed. I started having that itch that pushes you to look for another life, slower, more tangible. What I wanted was to be in contact with the earth, with people, with a different routine, and at the same time build something of my own. That's how I made the decision to leave the office and look for an old house in some town in Texas to convert it into a small hostel. Something simple, with 3 or 4 rooms where I could receive travelers who, like me, were tired of impersonal hotels. I started touring towns with history, and it was in Fredericksburg where I found what seemed like a forgotten jewel. The house was 2 blocks from the main square, on a half-broken cobblestone street, across from a bakery that smelled of burnt butter from 7 in the morning. It had a modest limestone facade with a huge wooden door and 2 wrought iron balconies with twisted railings. The lady who sold it to me, a distant aunt of a friend, told me it had been closed for more than 15 years. It had belonged to her grandfather, and afterward, no one wanted to take charge of it. I bought it for less than what an apartment in Houston costs. The first time I entered alone, the house smelled of old humidity like dried scab. The walls were cracked, the tile roof had several holes, and in the back there was an interior patio with a covered well and a stone sink covered with ivy. It was perfect. I spent the first 2 months between paperwork, municipal permits, and making sketches to divide the space into rooms. I was going to design the restoration myself, hiring local masons. I wanted to preserve the original adobe and stone walls, the fired clay floor, and the exposed wooden beams, all with respect for the original structure. It was in the 3rd week of remodeling when the problems began. We were tearing down an interior wall that separated 2 old rooms. It wasn't a load-bearing wall, just an old partition full of humidity. I was there taking photos of the process with my cell phone to document the changes when one of the masons, Ramiro, stopped his sledgehammer and said, "Mrs. Mariana, come see this." I approached. There was a hole between the bricks, and inside it something protruded, wrapped in old sacks. At first I thought it was trash, but Ramiro pulled the sack a little, and from it rolled out something small and dark. It was a child's shoe, made of leather, full of dust and cobwebs, completely dry. We stood in silence. Ramiro said something that made me frown. "This isn't the first time this has happened here." I asked what he meant, and he told me that in some old houses in Fredericksburg they had found strange things inside the walls. Not ghosts or scary things, but hidden objects. Amulets, wax figures, letters, even animal bones. He told me they were charms, offerings that were put in houses when they were built or when misfortunes happened. But this didn't seem like an offering. When we removed the rest of the wall, we found 2 more sacks. One contained a rag doll completely destroyed with pins stuck in its head. The other had bones, not animal bones, human bones, small ones. I immediately called the municipal police. The authorities arrived 2 hours later, reviewed the sacks, made a minimal perimeter, took photographs, and then asked me to close access to that part of the house. They told me the bones would be sent to the coroner in San Antonio for analysis. They interrogated me for more than an hour, reviewed my purchase papers, my ID, even my bank statements. The Masons left early that day without saying goodbye. The next day, a judicial agent called me. He asked me not to share anything on social media, that the investigation was going to take weeks, maybe months, but that initially it appeared the remains were from at least 2 infants and dated back more than 60 years. I was left alone in the house. I decided not to sleep there during the following days. I tried to continue with other parts of the remodeling, the patio, the facade, the garden. But the workers no longer wanted to enter. Even Ramiro, who was one of the most serious, told me kindly that he preferred not to return. "It's not because of you, ma'am. It's out of respect. That house has already said what it had to say. I'm not superstitious, but I'm not foolish either." I called the lady who sold me the house. She received me with distrust. She told me she didn't know anything, that her grandfather lived there alone, that the house had been closed since the 70s, except for a couple of tenants who entered in the 90s and left without a trace. I started investigating. I went to the municipal archive, reviewed old censuses, blueprints, property records. The grandfather, Don Elias Guzman, was a seed merchant according to the records. He lived alone in his last years, but in earlier censuses from the 40s, he appears with his wife, already deceased by then, and 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. The strange thing is that starting in 1948, the names of the 2 girls disappear from all documents. They don't appear in school records, marriage certificates, or civil registry. Only the older son appears as the sole heir in the 1971 deed. I asked around town, went to the oldest neighbors. One of them, Mrs. Estella, who barely hears anymore, told me something that still buzzes in my head. Don Elias' house was always closed, my dear. The girls didn't go out. You could only hear them crying sometimes. I asked if anything was ever reported. "Here you don't report anything, daughter. Here you keep quiet." It took me months to resume the work. I brought a new team from San Antonio, redesigned the project. I no longer wanted to make rooms in that part of the house. I converted it into storage. I left intact a piece of the original wall where you can still see the hole that hid the sacks. I put protective glass on it and a plaque that says, "Evidence not forgotten. Estimated year, 1950. It wasn't for morbidity, it was for memory. The prosecutor's office never contacted me again. I found out through a local journalist that the remains were classified as historical with no provable criminal cause. No one was accused. No one claimed anything. No family came forward. Today the hostel is functioning. It's called Casa Muro Vivo. I have 4 rooms, a garden where I serve coffee in the mornings, and a mural that an artist friend painted based on branch shapes like those that covered the patio well. Every time someone asks me if the house is haunted, I tell them no, that here there are no laments or doors that open by themselves or scary things. What there is history. Enclosed history. History with a name that was never spoken aloud. And sometimes silence weighs more than any scream. My name is Julian Sandoval. I've been driving trucks for more than 15 years. I've gone around the country so many times that I'm no longer impressed by seeing endless deserts or jungles that seem to never end. I know the routes by heart, the taste of coffee at each terminal, the type of potholes by state, even the accents when you stop at little stores. I've spent nights in the middle of the mountains, sleeping with the engine running for fear of being robbed, and entire days stranded at border crossings. But I had never felt as uncomfortable as in that town in East Texas where my drive shaft broke. What I'm going to tell you doesn't have ghosts or shadow men. It's more disturbing than that because what happened was real, and the way they treated me I'll never forget. It was July, the first half of the month. I was heading to Dallas with a load of machinery for a construction company. I had left Houston at dawn. Everything was going well until, reaching mile 43 of the state highway toward Tyler, the truck started vibrating. The rear axle was squeaking, as if something was coming loose. I pulled over as soon as I found a stretch of flat asphalt. I didn't see anything at first, but when I moved in reverse a few yards, I heard the dry crack. I got out and saw that the drive shaft was done for. One of the universal joints had burst, and the tube was already hanging loose. I called the truck owner, Don Elias. I explained the situation, and he told me he was going to send someone from Dallas, but it would take at least a full day to arrive with the part. "Don't move from there," he told me. "Stay close to the truck." And that's what I planned to do, but the heat was infernal. I was sweating through pores I didn't even know I had. Near the highway, I saw an old sign, Millfield 3 miles. It wasn't on the map or in the GPS, but I saw that further ahead there was a gap with a dirt road. I thought I could go look for shade or at least a place to buy water. I walked there with my backpack, an empty bottle, and my cell phone that barely had signal. The gap led me to a small town, one of those where the houses are unpainted concrete and the roofs are rusty sheet metal. The first thing I saw was a convenience store with a cooler full of sodas and a hand-painted sign that said Lupita's Corner Store. I entered. An older lady looked at me from behind the counter. She had her hair pulled back in a tight bun and didn't say anything when I entered. No good afternoon, or what can I get you? Do you have cold water? I asked. Yes, in the cooler. I took out a bottle, left the exact money on the table, and brought it to my mouth. The water tasted strange. Not bad, but different, as if it had been stored too long. Is there a place where I can wait? A diner or a little bench? I'm waiting for a part for my truck. The woman looked at me fixedly, as if the question made no sense. There's nothing else here, just the plaza. I went out, walked toward what seemed like the central plaza. A cement esplanade with a basketball court without backboards, surrounded by 3 benches and a flagpole without a flag. I sat down, took out my cigarette, and lit it calmly. And that's when I noticed people were looking at me, not the way you look at a stranger out of curiosity. It was different. They were watching. A group of children who were playing with a ball stopped doing so to observe me. A lady sweeping her porch stopped with the broom handle in the air. A man carrying a bucket to the well turned his neck more than necessary to see me. I got up uncomfortable. I walked back to the store. As I passed in front of another house, I saw that someone closed the curtains from inside. I felt watched, but not with distrust. It was something else. Surveillance. As if they were waiting for me to do something. As if they knew who I was, even though they clearly didn't know me. I went back to the corner store. The lady was still there. "Is there a shop here?" I asked. "No." "A diner?" "No." "Where can I rest for a while? I'm waiting for a part for my truck." "The plaza." I didn't insist anymore. I left. I sat again on the bench, this time under the tree. An hour passed, then two. The heat became thick. People kept passing and kept looking at me. I started getting nervous. I looked at my cell phone. 1 bar of signal. I sent a message to Don Elias. "I arrived at a town called Millfield. There's nothing here. I'll stay here until the part arrives." He never answered. Around 6, I decided to return to the truck. The idea of staying in that town all night didn't appeal to me. But as soon as I crossed the exit sign, a man spoke to me from a gate. "Are you the one with the truck?" I stopped. "Yes." "Is someone coming for you already?" "Yes, tomorrow." "Then stay here, it's better." "Why?" He didn't answer. He just turned around and closed the gate. I walked back along the gap, but I was no longer alone. In the distance, I saw a man standing in the middle of the road, motionless. When I approached, he stepped aside without looking at me. Further ahead, a woman came out of her house and crossed the sidewalk. She watched me pass without moving a muscle. I reached the truck. Everything was the same, closed, untouched. I got in the cab, lowered the locks, closed the curtains, turned on the emergency fan. I didn't sleep well. At midnight, I heard something, footsteps on the gravel. I looked through a crack. There were 2 people standing about 10 yards from the truck, an older woman and a child. They weren't doing anything, just looking. 15 minutes passed, then they left. At 5 in the morning, I got a message from Don Elias. "The mechanic leaves in 2 hours. He's bringing the part. Says he'll be there with you in the afternoon." I didn't want to go back to the town, but I was running out of water, so I walked again. This time no one looked at me. No one came out. The town was in complete silence. The corner store was closed. There was no one in the plaza. I knocked on doors. Nothing. Until at the 3rd house, a child opened for me. He was about 7 years old. "Is your mom here?" He shook his head. "Where is everyone?" "They went to the hill." "Why?" "Because you came." I froze. "And why didn't you go?" "I can't go up." "Why? Why are they watching me? Why don't they want me to come down? Who doesn't?" He didn't answer. That afternoon, the mechanic arrived. I was already waiting for him on the highway. When he saw my face, he asked what was wrong with me. "Nothing," I told him. "I just want to leave." He installed the part in less than an hour. When I started the engine and felt the drive shaft turning properly, I breathed like I hadn't since I entered that damn town. "What's this place called?" I asked the mechanic, looking at the dirt road. "What place?" "That little town, Millfield." He looked at me strangely. "There's no Millfield here, boss. Not on the maps. This gap doesn't lead anywhere. Just to a closed area they say used to be a ranch, and no one lives there anymore." "No, there is a town. I walked there twice, I swear." "Boss, there's nothing here. No one lives there. I would have known. I pass through this area often, and if there's a Millfield, it's not around here." I didn't tell him anything else. I drove to Dallas without stopping. I've never passed through that route again. I never found the name Millfield on any map. But I saw it. I was there. And they saw me, as if I were part of something I didn't understand, as if they weren't expecting visitors, as if they had let me leave only because I didn't want to stay. Since then, every time I pass through any small town, I check if there's anyone looking at me too fixedly. And when someone tells me there's nothing around here, I believe them. Because there are places where silence isn't lack of noise. It's a warning. My name is Morris Diaz. I'm 33 years old, and for a little more than 5 years I've been working as a surveyor for the U.S. Census Bureau. What I do doesn't seem like much from the outside. Walking from house to house with my beige vest, my visible credential, carrying a tablet and a support notebook. But if someone asked me what I've learned in this job, I'd tell them there are no two towns alike in America. Each community has its rhythm, its way of speaking, its silences. And there are silences that weigh more than others. What happened to me in the mountains of rural Montana isn't in any training manual. And if I tell it, it's not for drama. It's because since then I don't sleep well. And because something up there in that mountain range, thick with clouds, as green as it was closed, made me understand that there are places where you shouldn't insist. It was in March of last year. I was assigned a route in an area that on the map appears as dispersed community, a category we use when there are little houses or scattered dwellings in a rural area far from the population center. I had to cover a segment between Whitefish and Kalispell in a mountainous zone that could barely be reached by dirt road. They call it Copper Basin on old maps, but locals no longer use that name. They warned me at the office to bring food, that it was difficult to get there, and that possibly there wouldn't be signal. But that didn't worry me. I've worked in ranches in Colorado, in hills in Kentucky. I knew how to move around. I left from Missoula with the Census Bureau truck and arrived as far as the trail allowed. From there, I walked the last 2 hours to the first dwelling marked on my list. It was a wooden house with a sheet metal roof and a chicken coop to one side. At the entrance, there was an old palm cross and a piece of cloth tied to a tree, as if someone had improvised a clothesline. I knocked hard, as I always do. I introduced myself with a firm voice. "Good morning, I'm from the Census Bureau. I've come to conduct the census." "Nothing." I knocked again. This time I heard something inside, a creak, footsteps, but no one opened. I thought maybe they distrusted. It's not rare. Sometimes they don't want to talk or don't understand why we ask so many questions. I moved away a little, marked the dwelling as no response, and continued. The second house was about 500 yards away. The same thing, closed doors without locks, but no one outside. Again I knocked. This time I clearly heard a murmur, words in what I think was a native dialect, and the dragging of something against the floor. I approached the window. The curtain was drawn, but I saw a shadow. It moved slowly, as if passing from one room to another. I was paralyzed. "Good afternoon, I only need a few minutes. It's to update the database." Nothing, just the dry sound of something closing firmly. I was no longer so calm. I marked another, no response, even though I knew someone was inside. I continued down the path that was now more of a trail between abandoned coffee plantations and cornfields. The next 3 houses were the same. Closed, silent, at least on the outside. But in the 5th house, something changed. It was a more recent construction of unpainted gray block. It had an old antenna on the roof and two hammocks hanging on the porch, as if someone still lived there. As I approached, I saw a half-filled sack and next to it a board with chopped vegetables, already almost dry, as if someone had been cooking and had left suddenly. I knocked. No one. I turned around to leave when a voice stopped me. Low, broken. "You're not military, are you?" It was an older man. He was sitting behind a wooden fence, half hidden by the shadows of the porch. He wore a big hat, and his clothes were very old, like faded by the sun. "No, sir," I responded. "I'm from the Census Bureau. I'm gathering census information. I'm not here to bother anyone." "Others have come already," he told me, "but they didn't come up this high." I asked permission to ask him some questions, but he shook his head. "Don't put me on the list," he told me. "I don't want it known that I'm here." I asked him why. He looked at me fixedly with a mixture of sadness and rage. "Because no one's left here anymore, young man. Only those who don't want to leave." I thought he was speaking figuratively. Maybe he was referring to young people who had emigrated or that the community was abandoned. But no. "And the others?" I asked. "Inside," he told me, "but they don't answer anymore." He said it with such naturalness that it gave me chills. I tried not to seem nervous. I asked if he could explain better. He told me no, that he had already said enough, and that I should leave before it got dark. "Here the paths go out when evening falls," he said. "There's no shadow that doesn't listen." I walked away with growing discomfort, but I didn't return to the base point. Not yet. I felt restless, as if I were leaving something half done. So I walked to one last house, more remote, almost attached to the mountain. Upon arriving, I noticed something strange. There were live chickens walking free, but the feeders were dry. Outside, hanging clothes, but old, stiff from sun. Rusty cans on the ground. Someone lived or had lived there recently. I knocked. Nothing. I went around the house. A window was open. I looked in. And then I saw him. A man of about 40 was sitting in a chair in front of a table, motionless. He had his eyes open, but wasn't blinking. I thought he was dead until I saw how his fingers moved slightly on the table, as if he were drawing something invisible. I called out. He didn't react. I took courage and entered carefully. The air smelled of humidity and old smoke. I approached the man. "Are you all right?" I asked. "Nothing." On the table there were marks, circles carved with some sharp object. Not symbols, but rather repetitions, as if he had been doing the same thing for hours. I checked the house. In the next room there was another person, an older woman lying in a hammock. She didn't move either. Her eyes were closed, but she was breathing. On the floor there were ashes drawing a circle. I left. I ran. I returned to the base point with feet full of mud and a dry throat. I called the supervisor. He told me to report it as a difficult access area and leave, that this wasn't Census Bureau business. But I didn't do it. I wanted to return days later with a doctor I met in Missoula. We went together. The houses were still closed, but now not even a sound was heard. No footsteps, no whispers, no murmur in dialect. Just silence, the densest silence I've felt, as if indeed no one wanted to answer anymore. Or worse, as if those who were inside no longer had anyone to respond to. Today I keep working in the field, but not in Montana. I requested a transfer. I was never given an official reason for what I saw. No one investigated. No one returned to that community. But sometimes at night, when I review my old notes, I see the names of those houses marked in red. And I no longer ask myself who lived there, but what stayed there inside, waiting, quiet, listening. Because there are censuses that aren't made to count people, but to know how many are still pretending to be alive. My name is Emiliano Mina. I'm 26 years old, and I'm a veterinary doctor graduated from Colorado State University. My story isn't one of those you tell to entertain. It's more of a warning, because there are places in this country where the rules aren't set by science or logic, and where silence isn't ignorance but defense. It was the year 2023. I had just finished my residency at the Animal Health Center in Grand Junction. Like many recent graduates, I needed experience, so I started sending my resume to whatever county had livestock activity. I wasn't expecting much, but one afternoon I received a call from a number with a Montana area code. Dr. Emiliano Mina, we have your application. Would you be interested in covering the position in Copper Creek? They offered housing, support for supplies, and a modest but steady salary. I accepted without thinking. It was that or continue vaccinating sheep on the coast for $200 a day. Copper Creek was an almost invisible point on the map, a settlement hidden among hills in the south of the mountains, near the border with Wyoming. To get there, I had to take a bus to Billings, then a pickup truck on dirt roads for almost 2 hours. No signal, no internet. The clinic where I would work was a brick construction without paint, with an iron fence at the entrance, a rusty operating table, and a refrigerator that made more noise than cold. They told me not to worry, that the town had few emergencies. Most of the ranchers knew how to solve things themselves: amputate, suture, disinfect. I would be there mainly for protocol. The first month passed slowly. I checked chickens, dewormed some donkeys, treated a mule with an old wound. There wasn't electricity all day, so I got used to using a headlamp and boiling my own needles. Copper Creek had a little more than 120 inhabitants. Dry, reserved people. They weren't rude, but you could tell they didn't like questions. No one talked about themselves, no one said much beyond greetings. And that at first seemed to me just part of their culture. Until the first animal appeared. It was a goat. 2 teenagers brought it at dawn in a wheelbarrow. The body was open from chest to abdomen as if it had been dissected, but there was no blood. The organs were still in place, but the heart had been removed with surgical precision. I asked what had happened. One of the boys responded with downcast eyes. "We found it like this. It was supposed to give birth this week." I took photos, although I knew I had no one to send them to. I prepared a report that I never delivered to anyone. The following week, a calf arrived with similar wounds. This time, I found it myself. I was in a pasture near the ravine, lying on its side with open eyes, but no blood. The cut was clean, a curved line like a scalpel from neck to navel. The liver had been extracted, but without tearing the adjacent membranes. That night I knocked on the door of Don Joaquin, the oldest rancher in town. "Have you seen this before?" I asked, showing him the photos on my cell phone. The old man barely looked at them. He adjusted his hat and said something that marked me. "It's not convenient for you to be asking about that, young man. Here people take care of their livestock, but there are things you don't confront. You just avoid them." I left confused. I thought maybe there was some explanation they knew and I didn't. Maybe old practices, some superstition. I thought about predators, but neither a mountain lion would make cuts like that, nor would a human do it without leaving tracks, blood, or noise. By the third week, fear began to get under my skin. That dawn, I heard a metallic noise outside my house, as if someone were scratching with a rod on the door. I got up, took the lamp, but saw no one. I only found a footprint in the mud. It wasn't from a cow or a dog. It looked like a hoof, but with an elongated shape, a deep line in the center, as if the sole had an edge. I made a plaster cast of it. I showed it to Mrs. Candelaria, who prepared food for me twice a week. She immediately took it from my hands. "Burn it, my son, don't keep it. Those things are felt if you look at them." The situation worsened quickly. In less than 15 days, 5 more mutilated animals appeared: a donkey, 2 cows, a pregnant sow, and a dog. Always at dawn. Always without blood. Always with a missing organ. I began recording everything in a notebook: dates, owners' names, type of wounds, location. There was no clear pattern. The houses were distant from each other, some more than 2 kilometers away. It wasn't possible for someone to walk that distance each night without being seen or heard. I went to the sheriff, a fat, dark man always with dark glasses. "This already seems like a pattern," I told him. "Have you had similar reports in the past?" The man was quiet for a moment, then leaned toward me. "You're not understanding it, doctor. It's not your job to solve that. Your job is to cure what can be cured and bury what can't. But listen to me well. Here there are families that have been taking care of the ranch for generations. They know when there are mountain lions, when there's drought, and when you have to bow your head. This isn't your place to go around with theories." I got up without saying goodbye. I felt powerless, furious. It wasn't superstition. It wasn't a myth. These were facts. That night I stayed awake. I didn't have a weapon, but I did have a powerful flashlight and a hunting knife. Around 3 in the morning, I heard a weak bellow, like from a sick animal. It came from the corral in the back. I walked slowly without making noise. I turned off the flashlight and approached from the flank of the corral, between the mesquites. And then I saw a figure, hunched over, crouched over a goat. The animal wasn't moving. It wasn't big. It wasn't human, but it wasn't an animal either. I didn't make noise, not even one more step. I just stood watching. And at that instant, the figure stood up and disappeared. It didn't run, it didn't fly. It just wasn't there. The goat was still there, with its neck open. I returned to my house trembling. I didn't sleep. The next day no one asked. No one came near. When I went to the clinic, I found a cardboard box on the table. Inside there was a goat's head with a crumpled paper. The paper just said, "You've seen too much. You know too much. You decide." I left Copper Creek 2 days later. I didn't give notice. I didn't collect anything. I just took the notebook with my notes, the plaster cast of the footprint, and the record book. For weeks I felt like someone was following me. I slept little, distrusted everyone, until one morning when I left my room in Denver, I found a box in front of the door. Inside, the same plaster cast, burned. Since then, I've dedicated myself to domestic animal medicine in urban areas. I haven't returned to the mountains. I haven't spoken with anyone from the town again. When someone mentions Copper Creek, I say it doesn't exist. And when they ask me if I believe in strange things, I just respond, I don't believe, but I've seen enough not to deny. My name is Robert Martinez, and it's been years since I left my hometown. I was tired of the silence and solitude of that place where I spent my childhood, a mountain town in Colorado where the sun seemed to always set early and shadows stretched longer than they should. I decided to leave when I was 18, after my sister Victoria disappeared. We were only 10 and 12 years old when she vanished one morning without a trace. That marked a before and after in my life. Nobody knew what had happened. The search was exhaustive, but the leads dried up. My family, my parents, we all lost hope shortly after. Although life went on, a deep void remained in my heart. 22 years have passed since that day. And although I built a life far away, I never managed to completely distance myself from that memory. Every so often, during my sleepless nights, memories of her would assault me, her laughter, her face, how we used to play in the fields surrounding our house. But in those memories, whispers also appeared, whispers that murmured about the disappearance, about the shadows that surrounded everything that happened. A couple of weeks ago, I received a call I wasn't expecting. It was the voice of old George, the man who ran the general store, someone who had always been close to my parents. He told me my mother had fallen seriously ill and that I needed to return. My father had died years ago, but she never fully recovered from it. It was the perfect excuse to return to a place I never truly left behind, and deep down, I felt it was time to face the ghosts of the past. Returning was like entering a strange dream. The town looked the same, though something in the air felt different. I don't know if it was nostalgia or the time that had passed, but something had changed. Some houses, now abandoned, looked old, and the feeling that something wasn't right took hold of me as soon as I arrived. The first night I spent there, after settling into my parents' house, I felt a discomfort I couldn't explain. The house was just as I remembered it, my father's old armchair, the wooden table where my mother used to cook, the photographs on the walls. But something was missing, something you couldn't touch. The next day, I decided to go to the town cemetery. I didn't dare ask anyone about my sister, at least not yet, but something inside me pushed me to approach her grave. When I arrived, I was surprised to see that the place where she should be buried was empty. Only the base of a broken headstone remained, as if someone had torn it out. Nobody in town seemed to know anything about it, but the evasive looks from the older folks, like old George, told me there was something they didn't want to tell me. Days passed, and with each one, the pressure increased. The town was full of secrets, furtive glances, and conversations that stopped when someone approached. Nobody wanted to talk about Victoria or her disappearance. I decided to speak with the town's former sheriff, Mr. Stevens, who had been in charge of the investigation when my sister disappeared. I found him at his house, an adobe construction on the outskirts of town, surrounded by fields that looked frightening at dusk. Stevens was already old, his face marked by time, but when I mentioned my sister, his attitude changed. The smile disappeared from his face, and he invited me in, but his gaze was no longer one of trust. Something in his eyes told me he knew more than he had revealed at the time. "Robert," his trembling voice began, "there are things that shouldn't be remembered. There are secrets the town has buried for a reason." I asked him to explain, but he only told me that my sister hadn't disappeared as everyone thought. She hadn't gotten lost in the woods. It hadn't been an accident. She knew something, he said, and his words left me frozen. Something she shouldn't have known. The sheriff told me that Victoria had been very curious, that she had started asking about old rumors in the town. She had talked about an old abandoned mine in the mountains, one that adults always avoided mentioning. According to rumors, the mine had been a cursed place where some had disappeared during the Civil War era. They said the mine contained a dark mystery, but nobody dared investigate too much. And Victoria, with her childish mind, had started asking questions. The adults began to notice, and before I could ask more, the sheriff warned me to be careful. That same night, I couldn't sleep. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, but I still didn't understand why my sister had to pay the price. What had she discovered, and why didn't anyone want to talk about the mine? I decided to investigate on my own. I took an old map of the town and located the mine. It was high in the mountains, surrounded by a dense forest that almost nobody dared cross. I knew that if I wanted answers, I had to go there. The next day, I packed a backpack with what I needed and headed toward the mine. The path was long and dangerous, but something inside me pushed me to continue. As I climbed, the air became colder and the forest shadows seemed to move around me. There were no animals, no sounds, just sepulchral silence. When I reached the mine entrance, a strange feeling of unease invaded me. The mouth of the mine was dark, as if something were waiting inside. I decided to enter. I advanced cautiously, lighting the way with a flashlight. The humidity of the place was thick, and the echo of my footsteps reverberated off the walls. Something in the air smelled strange, like old earth, like something that should never have been touched. At the back, I found what I was looking for, a small hidden room inside the mine where I discovered traces of what seemed like a campsite. Remains of an extinguished fire, old clothes, and what chilled my blood, a series of photographs. They were photos of children from the town, some familiar, others not so much. And among them was a photo of my sister Victoria. Suddenly, I understood what had happened. My sister had discovered an old town ritual, something related to the mine, a dark ritual that had been carried out by generations of men in the town. Those who disappeared didn't do so by accident, but because they knew too much. Terrified, I ran out of the mine. My mind couldn't process what I had just discovered. As I descended, one idea tormented me. What if my sister was never a victim, but part of something much bigger, something that still persists in the town's shadows? I never returned to the mine, and when I went back to town, I confronted those who knew the truth. Although few confirmed it for me, there was something more, something much darker and more terrifying that I never wanted to know completely. But now I know that my sister's fate was much more complex than they told me. And if I ever return, it won't just be for my mother or for the town. It will be because there are still secrets buried in those mountains that must be unveiled. And I, without wanting to, have become part of that story. My name is Lily, and I came to this coastal town hoping to start a new life. After years of routine office work in a gray building and broken relationships, I decided I needed a radical change. I wanted to leave behind the city, the traffic jams, the noise, the people who barely looked at each other, and everything that was suffocating me day by day. So after much deliberation, I found a small house in a forgotten corner of the Oregon coast, a secluded place with a wonderful view of the ocean, where everything seemed to move slowly and peacefully. My idea was simple. Start over, enjoy the silence and peace, and perhaps discover a bit more about myself in the process. The town is called Beacon Harbor, a simple name, like its people and customs. Although in the first few days everything seemed perfect, something inside me began to feel that things weren't as idyllic as they appeared. When I arrived, the few neighbors I saw received me with kindness, but I couldn't help but notice something strange in their gazes. It was as if they were all watching me with uncomfortable curiosity, something I initially attributed to my condition as an outsider. After all, Beacon Harbor wasn't a place with many visitors. It seemed like a town that lived on the margins of everything. The houses were small, made of weathered wood, many surrounded by neglected gardens where plants grew without much attention, giving them an air of abandonment. The first few days I spent organizing my things, cleaning, and trying to give a personal touch to my home. Everything was fine, or at least that's what I thought. The walks on the beach were refreshing, and the afternoons at the harbor watching the fishing boats gave me a peace I hadn't known. However, on the third day, I noticed something strange. A man had been staring at me fixedly from a distance. He was near the dock, next to a group of other men, but his gaze was different. It wasn't like the others who greeted me with a quick smile and then returned to their business. This man wouldn't take his eyes off me. It was something unsettling, as if he were trying to read me. I decided to ignore it, but from then on, things started getting weird. Every time I went out, someone was watching me. A neighbor who used to cross paths with me on the street would always stop for a moment and observe me in silence. The elderly people in the small market, who barely spoke to outsiders, would look at me sideways while murmuring something among themselves. I felt like a piece out of place in a puzzle I didn't understand. One day I decided to go to the grocery store to buy bread and some fruits. The store was in the central square, a small establishment with wooden shelves and an earthy smell that seemed to emanate from the walls. There I met Mrs. Carmen, the woman who ran the place. She was an elderly woman who always wore an apron stained with flour, and who, despite her age, maintained a contagious energy. "What a pleasure to see you, Lily. You're not from around here, are you?" she said while handing me the bread. "No, I'm new. I'm trying to get used to this place," I responded with a polite smile, but she didn't return the smile. Her gaze hardened as if she were evaluating me, and then, in an almost inaudible whisper, she added, "This isn't a place for everyone, dear. Here, people aren't like in other places. There are things you can't see, but they're always present." My eyes widened in surprise, but before I could ask more, Mrs. Carmen turned around and gave me her back, returning to the canned goods shelf. I felt a growing discomfort, but decided not to give it much importance. Maybe she was a superstitious woman, an older lady with strange ideas. However, something in her words kept spinning in my head. That same night, while I was having dinner at my kitchen table, I heard a light tapping on the window. It was a soft sound, but loud enough to call my attention. I got up quickly, looking out the window without being able to see anything in the darkness. I thought it could be an animal, maybe a bird or some rodent. But when I looked again toward the street, I saw several people standing in front of my house in the dim light, motionless. They were too still, too silent. My breathing accelerated, and without thinking, I quickly turned off the lights and stayed silent, watching from the shadows. I saw them stay there for several minutes, immobile, until without making noise, they began to slowly disperse in different directions. A chill ran down my spine as I realized that although they weren't doing anything obvious, I felt watched, surrounded by something I didn't understand. The next morning, I approached the square looking for some normalcy, but what I found unsettled me even more. The children who normally should be running and playing were all gathered in a circle near the church, looking toward a single point. They weren't playing, they weren't laughing, they just watched in silence. I approached one of them, a small boy with a faded yellow shirt, and asked him, "What are you looking at? Why are you so quiet?" The boy looked at me fixedly with eyes so deep they made me shudder. Then, in an almost mechanical way, he responded, "We shouldn't talk. They're watching us." I froze. Them? Who? But the boy had already returned to his position, head tilted, observing with an unnatural stillness. The feeling of paranoia began to intensify. Every time I went out to walk around town, it was as if people were following me with their gazes. Even the animals seemed restless as I passed, watching me with eyes that were too attentive. Dogs that would normally bark at any stranger stayed quiet, staring at me fixedly from house corners. One afternoon, I decided to investigate on my own. I went to the town library, which was in an old building with thick walls and leather-bound books. There, a woman with short hair and tired eyes watched me with distrust as I approached the counter. "How can I help you?" she asked dryly. "I'm looking for something about the town's history, something that explains what's happening," I responded, not knowing how to put my fears into words. The librarian stared at me for a long while, then whispered, "If you're looking for what I think you are, you'd better not do it. There are things here that shouldn't be known, much less spoken aloud." My head was spinning. Everything led me to the same conclusion, but I didn't want to accept it. The people in this town weren't just watching me, something else was happening, something dark and silent, like a web being woven around me. One night, already exhausted by fatigue, I fell into a deep sleep. However, something woke me in the middle of the night, a dull, constant sound, like a distant murmur. I got up from bed and walked to the window. Looking outside, I saw what I had been fearing. I wasn't alone. A group of people, men and women of all ages, were standing in front of my house, watching me as if waiting for something. That night, something inside me broke. I decided I couldn't stay in that place any longer. These people, this town, they didn't want me there. They didn't want me. The decision was clear. The next day, I would pack my things and leave as far away as possible. But before doing so, I wanted to understand. I needed to know what was happening, and if there was any way to escape that suffocating feeling that surrounded me. That night, I finally saw what I had been looking for. The answer was in the sea. As I watched from my window, I saw them all, every single resident of Beacon Harbor, walking slowly toward the shoreline in perfect silence. They moved like they were in a trance, their eyes fixed on the dark waters. And there, in the moonlight reflecting off the waves, I understood the truth that Mrs. Carmen had tried to warn me about. Some places choose their people, and some places never let them go. My name is Philip. I'm 24 years old, and what happened that night in that remote town changed me forever. If I'm telling you my story, it's because I still can't fully understand what I experienced. And although I don't know if I'll ever find answers, I feel I need to share it. Maybe, just maybe, someone can warn others and prevent what happened to me. I was traveling back to Denver after a long weekend in the Rocky Mountains. My old, somewhat deteriorated car wasn't the best for long trips, but I didn't want to spend more money on repairs. By then, I felt comfortable with its quirks, and every strange noise had become part of the routine. I had taken the secondary highway because I liked the scenery. I knew it would take me a bit away from the main interstate, but it was nothing I couldn't handle. The storm broke out just when I found myself on a stretch where there were no more towns in sight, and the sky began to darken rapidly. The first drops were calm, but soon the rain unleashed with fury. Visibility was reduced to almost nothing, and soon thunder began to resonate as if the sky were falling. I tried to keep moving forward, but the car began to fail. The engine started making a strange noise, and suddenly the motor shut off completely. I tried to start it again, but it wouldn't respond. I didn't know if it had been the water, the poor state of the battery, or something worse. But I found myself completely stopped in the middle of the storm. I got out of the car, trying not to get too soaked, but the water chilled me to the bone. I looked around. All I could see were trees and more trees. At that moment, the feeling of being completely alone on that desolate stretch hit me like a sledgehammer. I decided to try to find help in the nearest town, which, according to a rusty sign I had seen minutes before, seemed to be a few miles away. By then, the rain was so heavy I could barely make out the road, but I had no choice but to head out on the highway and walk. The wind blew forcefully, pushing the rain toward my face, but the darkness didn't allow me to clearly perceive distances. Almost an hour after walking, I could finally see lights in the distance. The town seemed to be much closer than I thought. As I approached, I felt strange relief. I thought I would find a refuge, even if temporary, where they could help me solve the car problem. When I arrived in town, I realized something wasn't right. The streets were empty, not a single soul in sight. The air seemed dense, as if everything were in uncomfortable silence. And although the storm was raging forcefully, I couldn't hear the sound of rain hitting the ground, only the dull sound of thunder. I walked through the streets looking for some sign of life until I found a small store with a flickering light coming from inside. I knocked on the door. A man about 50 years old, rough-looking, with a face as weathered as the wood of the door, opened for me. He stared at me fixedly and at first said nothing. Finally, when he saw the desperation in my eyes, he muttered a "What do you want?" I quickly explained that my car had broken down and that I needed help, that I only asked for a phone to call a tow truck or some mechanic. The man observed me for a moment, as if evaluating whether he should help me or not. "Where are you coming from?" he asked in a low voice. "From the city via the main highway," I responded, not knowing how strange that might sound. The man said nothing more, just gestured with his head for me to follow him. He led me to a table in the center of the store where there were several old chairs and a large, unlit fireplace. He offered me a cup of coffee which, although bitter, I accepted without thinking. While I drank, I tried to decide what to do next, when I noticed something didn't add up. Despite the storm raging outside, the man didn't seem to show the slightest concern about the weather. There was also no mention of the possibility that someone might come to help me. On the contrary, his gaze was distant, as if he were waiting for something but didn't dare say it. At that moment, a couple of people entered the store. They were two women with tired-looking faces, wearing dark clothes, but their gaze was fixed and cold. They didn't say a single word. They looked at me with distrust, but they didn't seem to have hostile intentions. Nevertheless, a cold sweat ran down my back. What seemed strange to me wasn't just the icy atmosphere, but the fact that they didn't speak a single word among themselves. After a few minutes of uncomfortable silence, the store man looked me directly in the eyes and said, "Without beating around the bush, what you're looking for isn't here, kid. You'd better leave this place." Confused and somewhat nervous, I asked him what he meant by that. "I'm telling you for your own good, this isn't a place for strangers," he responded with a tone that brooked no discussion. I didn't understand his words well, but I knew something wasn't right. When I left the store, I decided to walk toward the town center, but everything became even stranger. The few houses there seemed uninhabited, and the lights flickered as if the electricity were failing. There wasn't a single sound of life, as if the entire town were in complete silence. Suddenly, I felt someone following me. I turned around and saw a figure in the distance, standing next to a house, watching me. Their face was partially covered by a hood, but the sensation of being watched made me shudder. I quickened my pace, but something made me stop. A soft whisper came from one of the nearby houses, as if someone were calling me in a low voice. I decided to ignore it, but when I turned around, I saw something that chilled my blood. The figures that had been in the store, the two women and the man, were now at the threshold of a house, looking at me in complete silence. It was at that moment I understood. It wasn't just the storm that isolated me. I was trapped in a town where nothing was what it seemed, where nobody wanted an outsider to discover what was hidden beneath its surface. Every step I took brought me closer to something I couldn't fully understand, but that urged me to flee. The sensation of being watched was unbearable, and worst of all, I couldn't distinguish whether those eyes were waiting for me to make a mistake, or if it was already too late for me. I made the decision to return to the car, but the rain wouldn't stop, and the air seemed denser with each step I took. Nobody came to help me, and that town now seemed like a place forgotten by civilization, where shadows seemed to live under the skin of its inhabitants. I only knew I had to get away from there, although my heart pounded hard thinking that what I had witnessed wasn't a simple misunderstanding, but something much darker. Somehow I managed to start the car, although I had no idea how I had survived that nightmare. My only certainty is that I never again took that highway, nor did I ever find that town again. And although I never knew what really happened, what I saw in those strangers' gazes was enough to understand that some shadows are better kept away from us. And if you ever find yourself in a place like that, remember that some storms don't calm down with water, but with the same darkness that provokes them. The strangest part, when I checked the map the next day, trying to find that town again, there was nothing marked on that stretch of highway. Nothing at all. As if Millbrook, that's what the faded sign had said, had never existed in the first place. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And sometimes, late at night when storms roll through Denver, I can still hear those whispers calling my name. My name is John. I'm 36 years old, and I've worked as an engineer at the same company for almost a decade. The daily routine had left me exhausted, and finally, after so much time, I decided I needed a break. It was my sister, who recommended the idea of renting a cabin in the countryside to escape the city's hustle and bustle. I thought of it as an opportunity to reconnect with myself and enjoy a couple of days of peace and tranquility. The cabin was about 4 hours away in a small rural area of upstate New York that I had never visited. As a good city man, I didn't know much about the place, but the photo on the website seemed attractive. A rustic cabin surrounded by trees and with a nearby stream. It seemed like the perfect escape to disconnect. I thought there couldn't be a better option to relax. The trip was peaceful. From the moment I left the city, the highway narrowed and houses began disappearing. The landscape changed from concrete and steel to a vast expanse of fields and mountains covered with vegetation. As I advanced, I felt the pressure from work and daily worries gradually disappearing. My only company was the sound of my car's engine and the crackling of dry leaves falling alongside the road. I arrived at the town near nightfall. It was a small locality of no more than 100 inhabitants, and the air seemed clean and fresh. The place had nothing more than a grocery store, a couple of country houses, and what caught my attention most, an old stone church with a bell tower that resonated in the distance. Nobody received me, but the cabin owner, Mrs. Rosalind, had left the keys in a small box under the porch. "It's all you need," said the note that accompanied the keys. It seemed strange not to see anyone, but I decided not to think much about it. I just wanted to get to the place and start resting. The cabin was isolated from town, about 20 minutes down a winding road that crossed through a thick forest. Dusk was already fading when I arrived. The cabin was just as I had seen it in the photos, made of wood with a red tile roof and a fireplace that promised warmth during cold nights. Around it, a wide terrain of dry grass and trees that seemed to be in full autumn season. The silence was profound, as if nature itself were holding its breath. I entered, left my suitcase on a wooden table in the living room, and sat in front of the fireplace. There was something strange in the air, a kind of unsettling stillness, but I attributed it to being outside my comfort zone. The house didn't have much decoration, but what was there was well cared for: an old rug, some wooden chairs, a large table, and a bookshelf with dusty books. The aroma of fresh wood relaxed me, and I spent the rest of the afternoon reading a couple of books I had brought. That night, as the mountain cold invaded the room, I wrapped myself in a thick blanket in front of the fire. The sound of wind through the trees and the occasional creaking of the cabin gave me the sensation of being completely alone in the world. There was no phone signal, no internet, no noise other than the forest. I closed my eyes and fell into a deep sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night. Something had pulled me from my sleep, a noise. At first, I thought it was the wind or some animal moving near the cabin, but the sound was more like a creaking, something metallic. I looked up at the ceiling where the firelight projected distorted shadows. I couldn't identify the source of the noise, so I decided to go back to sleep. The next day, I went out to explore the terrain a bit. The sun was high, and the morning warmth made me feel that everything was in its place. I decided to walk a bit through the forest surrounding the cabin, following a small trail that seemed to lead somewhere. The air was fresh, but at the same time heavy, as if something wasn't right. As I advanced, I noticed the trees seemed taller and thicker, and the trail increasingly narrow. In the distance, among the trees, I saw something that caught my attention: a figure, or rather, a silhouette. I stopped, looking toward the figure that seemed to be standing in the distance. It was a person, although I couldn't distinguish more details. I felt uncomfortable, but didn't want to think about it. It was probably someone from town taking a walk there. However, the figure didn't move. It just remained immobile, watching me. I decided to return to the cabin, but the air felt denser, almost charged, as if something were lurking. I didn't give it much importance. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks. When I returned to the cabin's interior, the silence enveloped me again, but something had changed. The sensation of peace I had felt the day before had now disappeared. Something in some corner of that house seemed strange to me. That night, the noise returned. This time it wasn't a simple creaking. It came from below, from the basement. I remembered the cabin had a small wooden door in the floor right next to the fireplace that gave access to the basement. I thought about the possibility that some animal had gotten in there, but something told me it wasn't that simple. The sound was low, a soft tapping followed by a whisper that seemed to drag between the walls. I decided to investigate. With a flashlight in hand, I went down the creaking stairs that led to the basement. When the door opened, cold air hit my face. The room was full of dust, but what caught my attention most was a large wooden box in a corner. The sound was coming from there. Cautiously, I approached, and when I opened it, I found something that left me speechless. Inside was a series of strange objects, old tapes, black and white photographs, and what appeared to be pieces of ancient clothing. At the bottom of the box, something darker gleamed faintly in the flashlight's light. It was a ceramic figure, a man with an expressionless face, and an expression that chilled my blood. At that moment, I felt something wasn't right, that everything I had seen in that place had a history I shouldn't know. But it was already too late. The next morning, I decided to leave. Something told me I had gotten into a place I shouldn't have. I didn't wait even a minute longer. While I was packing my things, a neighbor appeared, an older woman with sunken eyes and a tense smile. "Everything all right at the cabin?" she asked me. I tried to respond with a smile, but something in her gaze made me feel she knew exactly what had happened, although she didn't say another word. I left there without looking back. While I was driving away, I saw the town church again, whose bell tower now seemed darker and more sinister than it had at the beginning. My mind was still spinning about what I had found in the basement, but something inside me knew I could never get rid of the uneasiness that cabin had planted in my chest. But as I drove down that winding mountain road, I realized the ceramic figure was sitting on my passenger seat, staring at me with those same expressionless eyes. I never remembered putting it in my car, and when I reached for my rearview mirror to look back at the cabin one last time, I saw the old woman standing in the middle of the road, watching me leave with that same knowing smile. I drove for 3 hours straight without stopping, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever I had disturbed in that basement was now following me home. My name is Gabriel Lopez, and back in 2020, I was a college kid working the night shift at a convenience store in downtown Chicago, just a block from the Art Institute. It was one of those corner stores, a new 7-Eleven that had popped up where an old diner used to be. I needed the cash to cover my tuition, and the gig wasn't bad quiet, especially after midnight. My manager, Tom, and I would take turns at the register, serving late-night stragglers through a walk-up window since the area got dicey after dark. I'd been there about 3 weeks, and honestly, the job was chill. After 1 in the morning, I'd do inventory, stock shelves, or scroll through my phone. If someone knocked at the window, I'd hop up, serve them, and that was that. But one night, everything changed. I was heading to the back storage room to grab some boxes of snacks to restock the shelves. Tom was at the counter, half asleep in his chair, the dim hum of the store's fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I pushed open the storage room door, and right there, at the far end of the room, I froze. Dangling at eye level were a pair of legs, pale, grayish, swaying slightly. My heart stopped. I looked up, and there was a man hanging from a rope, his body limp, his hands unnaturally still, like they hadn't seen blood in years. I stumbled back, screaming Tom's name, my voice cracking as I bolted to the front. Tom was already up, startled, asking what the hell was wrong. "There's someone back there," I gasped, my words tripping over each other. He's hanging." Tom's face went blank, but his eyes widened like he knew something I didn't. He didn't say a word, just marched to the storage room, where the door had somehow swung shut. He pushed it open, stepped inside, and came back out fast, his face pale. "Come here," he said, grabbing my arm and pulling me back to the counter. "Just stay here." I was freaking out, my mind racing. "We gotta call the cops, an ambulance, something," I said, but Tom shook his head, his voice low. "No, Gabe, you don't get it. That was real." "What do you mean, not real?" I snapped, my hands shaking. He took a deep breath, glancing at the storage room door like it might open on its own. "When we first opened this place, the realtor who showed us around, she told me something. Said this building used to be a diner, but before that, it was just a vacant lot. Years ago, some guy, he ended his life here, right in that back room, hung himself just like you saw." I stared at him, my stomach twisting. "You're messing with me." "I'm not," he said, his voice dead serious. I didn't believe it either. Thought she was just superstitious, always clutching her cross necklace, muttering prayers when she showed us the place. But then I heard from the morning shift manager. One of his guys saw the same thing a month ago. Same guy, same rope, swinging back and forth, making these thumping noises against the walls. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Chicago's a big city, full of noise and life. You don't expect ghosts in a place like this, not with cars honking outside and drunk college kids stumbling by. But what I saw wasn't a movie. It was real, too real. Those gray hands, the way the body swayed. It wasn't something I could unsee. Tom turned on a small radio, some old classic rock station, to break the silence. "We stay at the counter," he said. "Don't go back there unless you absolutely have to, like bathroom emergencies only." He forced a laugh, but his eyes were uneasy. Later that night, he had to use the restroom, which was right by the storage room. "Wish me luck," he muttered, half joking, as he opened the door. I stood by the counter, watching, my heart pounding. He came back a minute later, shaking his head. "Nothing there, door stayed open. We're good." That night we barely had any customers, which was a blessing because my nerves were shot. When the sun finally came up, we locked up and went home, but the memory clung to me like damp cold. I switched to the morning shift soon after, hoping daylight would keep the weirdness at bay. But even then, things happened. One morning I was alone. My coworker had stepped out to grab coffee from a food truck down the street when I heard voices. Not clear words, just a low murmur coming from the back of the store. I froze, staring at the storage room door. No one could have gotten in there. The back exit was locked, and the upstairs offices had been empty for years. I told myself it was nothing, just pipes or the building settling, but my hands were clammy as I kept restocking shelves, pretending I wasn't scared out of my mind. Another time, late at night before I switched shifts, Tom and I heard banging on the storage room door. Not loud, but steady, like someone was knocking to be let out. Tom grabbed my arm, whispering, "Don't move, it'll stop." And it did after a few agonizing seconds, but the fear didn't. Every shift after that, I was on edge, waiting for that man to show up again, his pale hands swaying in the dark. I worked at that 7-Eleven for another few months, and I got through it by staying busy, stocking, cleaning, anything to keep my mind off what I'd seen. But I never went into that storage room alone again. I don't know if they ever did anything to cleanse the place, but I hope they did. Whatever that was, it felt trapped, like it was stuck reliving that moment over and over. I don't know how you help something like that, but I hope it finds peace someday. I'm Nathan Cole, and in 1995, I was working as a maintenance assistant for a telecom company in a small town called Willow Creek, just outside Boise, Idaho. It was a quiet place, full of old brick houses and abandoned barns, with a river cutting through the edge of town. My job was simple: help fix up small telecom outposts, usually in the middle of nowhere. Most of our work happened at night to avoid disrupting service, and that's when things got weird. One night around 2 a.m, my coworker, Sam, and I were out at a tiny concrete building on the outskirts of town, near the Piet River. The place was maybe 10 by 12 feet, surrounded by gravel roads and empty fields. No one lived nearby. It was just us, the crickets, and the occasional rumble of a distant truck. Sam was outside, checking the external wiring, while I was inside, messing with a fuse box. The air was chilly, the kind that seeps into your bones, and the only light came from my flashlight and the dim glow of a street lamp outside. Suddenly, I heard the door creak open, and Sam slipped inside, moving fast but quiet. He didn't say a word, just went straight to a toolbox on the table, rummaging through it like he was looking for something urgent. His breathing was heavy, almost panicked, but he was trying to play it cool, twisting a couple of wires in his hands for no reason. I could tell something was wrong. His face was pale, his eyes darting. "Sam, you okay?" I asked. But before he could answer, the door, which he hadn't fully closed, swung open with a thud. I looked out into the dark, and there, maybe 20 feet away, lit faintly by the street lamp, was something I'll never forget. It was a mule trudging slowly down the gravel road, its hooves crunching against the stones. But where its head should have been, there was nothing, just a dark, empty space. A tattered saddlebag hung off its side, swaying as it moved, and the sound of its steps echoed in the silence. I stood there, my mouth dry, unable to look away. The mule didn't stop, just kept walking, disappearing into the shadows toward the river. I don't know how long I stared, but when I finally turned to Sam, he was pressed against the wall, still clutching those wires, his breathing shallow. "You saw it too, didn't you?" I whispered. He nodded, his voice shaky. "Thank God it's gone." We didn't talk much after that. Sam closed the door, locked it, and we sat there, listening to the night, waiting for any sound that didn't belong. When we were sure it was safe, we grabbed our stuff, jumped in the truck, and peeled out of there. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting that thing to be following us, but the road was empty. On the drive back, once we'd hit the main road, Sam finally spoke. "Whatever that was, it wasn't good," he said. "I saw it coming down the road and I had to get inside. Didn't want to be out there alone with it." I laughed, but it was more nerves than anything. "Good thing I wasn't out there by myself," I said. "No one would have believed me." We didn't see it again, but that night changed how I felt about Willow Creek. We had to work those late shifts plenty of times after that, but I was never at ease. Every creak of a branch, every shadow in the corner of my eye had me on edge, wondering if that headless mule was still out there, wandering toward the river. I don't know what it was or why it showed up, but it felt like something old, something tied to that lonely stretch of road. All I know is I'm glad I wasn't alone when it passed by. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another tale from the shadows. I'm recording this under a stormy sky in the heart of New Mexico, where the rain's drumming hard and the wind's howling like a restless spirit. Forgive the background noise. It's just the weather adding its own eerie touch to tonight's story. I had a bit of a hiccup with a video I planned to share, a special extra for you all, but part of the file got corrupted. We managed to salvage one story, though, and trust me, it's worth hearing. It's the kind that sticks with you, makes you question what's out there in the dark. So, grab your drink of choice, settle in, and let me take you back to 1987, to a copper mine in the rugged hills of Grant County, New Mexico. This is my story, and it's one I've never fully shaken. My name's John, though I'd rather you didn't spread that around. I'm getting on in years now, and I've got a pension to protect, not to mention my family's peace of mind. That's why I'm keeping things vague, no specifics about me or where exactly this happened. Let's just say it was a small mining town, the kind where opportunities are scarce, and the mine is the lifeblood of the community. My father, my uncles, my grandfather, they all worked the mines, and I followed in their footsteps. It wasn't a choice made lightly. We all knew the risks, cave-ins, toxic dust, the toll it takes on your body and the land. But in a place like this, you either take up the family trade, leave town, or scrape by on nothing. For me, the mine was the only steady work I could find. Back in '87, I was working for a company that wasn't always on the right side of the law. They'd send us to dig in remote sites, places they hadn't bothered to get permits for. They'd grease palms, hush up locals, and start digging before anyone could ask questions. The pay was good, real good, because the risks were high. If something went wrong, a collapse or an accident, the company wouldn't take responsibility. They made that clear. But the money was enough to keep most of us quiet, including me, even though my parents warned me against taking those jobs. My dad, especially, knew the dangers. He'd nearly lost his own father, my granddad, in a cave-in years before. Granddad was trapped for 2 days, but made it out alive. Still, the fear stuck with my dad, and he begged me to steer clear of those shady gigs. But need has a way of drowning out warnings, and I took the work when it came. This particular job was at a mine near a tiny town called Silver Creek, tucked away in the hills. It was my last job of that kind, and it changed me, shifted the way I see the world. From the first day, something felt off. I was working with my best friend, who I'll call Mike. He was a solid guy, always up for any job, no matter how risky, and his company made the long shifts bearable. We'd been assigned to a small crew, just 5 of us, working a new tunnel in a mine that wasn't exactly on the books. As we headed into the main shaft that first morning, we noticed something strange. Other figures moving in the distance, slipping into the tunnels ahead of us. They were far off, too far to make out clearly, but we could see them, 3 or 4 men maybe, moving silently into the dark. The thing was, we hadn't been told anyone else would be working there. In a mine this small, you'd know if another crew was around. You'd have to, just to avoid stepping on each other's toes or worse, causing an accident. Mike and I figured they might be locals, maybe from Silver Creek, working their own gig. The town was only a few miles away, a cluster of dusty houses and a general store. But when we asked our crewmates, they shrugged it off. Nobody knew who these guys were or what they were doing. Some of the older miners started acting cagey, changing the subject or telling us to focus on our work. One morning, Mike, who had a knack for lightening the mood, started calling them the Shadow Men to get a laugh. But when we mentioned it to our supervisor, he snapped at us to shut up and get back to work. That shut us down quick. It was like the topic was cursed. Nobody wanted to touch it. Still, Mike and I couldn't let it go. Those figures kept showing up, always just out of reach, disappearing into the deeper tunnels. We'd see them in the early morning, their silhouettes flickering in the dim light of the entrance galleries, but never close enough to make out their faces. And here's the kicker, we never heard them. In a mine, sound carries, boots crunching, tools clanging, voices echoing. But these guys, nothing. Not a step, not a whisper. It was like they vanished into the rock itself. Our crew was small, so it wasn't like we could lose track of people. And yet, no one else seemed to care. The other guys started crossing themselves before heading into the mine, something we'd always done, but now seemed heavier, like they knew something we didn't. One evening, after a grueling shift, Mike pulled me aside. "You notice anything weird about those guys?" he asked, his voice low. "Like, really weird." He wouldn't say more, just told me to watch them closely the next morning. So I did. I paid attention to their clothes, faded work shirts, heavy boots, helmets that looked older than ours, almost outdated. They moved with purpose, but always just ahead of us, slipping into the dark before we could catch up. And like always, we never saw them leave. Not once. It was like they were part of the mine itself. Their one moment, gone the next. A few days later, we got a break and headed to a little bar in Silver Creek. It was a quiet place, just a few locals nursing beers. Mike and I got to talking with the bartender, an old guy named Tom, who'd lived there his whole life. We mentioned we were working the mine up the hill, and his eyes lit up with a strange mix of curiosity and caution. "You boys seen anything up there?" he asked, leaning across the counter. "Like anything off?" Mike and I exchanged a glance. "You mean the Shadow Men?" I said, half joking. Tom didn't laugh. Instead, he nodded like he'd been expecting it. "My granddad's one of them," he said, his voice steady but heavy. "He died up there in '52. Cave-in, followed by a flood. Took him and most of his crew. They never made it out. Folks around here still see them sometimes, walking the hills or heading into the mine. Always early in the morning, always out of reach." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Mike looked like he'd seen a ghost himself. Tom pulled out an old photo from behind the bar, a grainy black and white shot of his granddad, dressed in a miner's outfit, faded shirt, heavy boots, an old-fashioned helmet. It was the same kind of clothes we'd seen on those figures. "If you see him, tell him his grandson says hi," Tom said with a sad smile. "But don't expect him to answer." We laughed it off, but it didn't feel funny. That night, Mike and I talked it over. We couldn't remember exact details about the men we'd seen, just their clothes and the way they moved, always slipping away. We vowed to pay closer attention to see if we could spot something, anything, that matched Tom's granddad. But the job was short, and we were rotated out soon after. Those last few days, we saw the figures again, same as always, disappearing into the tunnels. We tried to catch up to listen for them, but it was like chasing smoke. No footprints, no tool marks, nothing but our own work in the mine. It was as if they'd never been there at all. When we left Silver Creek, Mike and I each left a small token in the mine, a leather wristband, something personal as a quiet offering. A hope that those men, whoever they were, might find peace. I don't know if that mine's still active, but if it is, I'd wager those shadow men are still there, walking the tunnels, forever bound to the rock. Some things don't rest easy, and I've learned to live with the questions they leave behind. My name is Oscar, and I'm an embalmer at Guardian Angel Funeral Home, a quiet place tucked away on the outskirts of a small town in rural New Mexico. It's a forgotten corner where the desert stretches endlessly, and the Sandia Mountains hold secrets older than time itself. Out here, the line between life and death blurs, like heat waves shimmering on the horizon. My work has given me a front row seat to things that defy logic, whispers in the dark, fleeting shadows that chill your blood, glimpses of something other. Most of these moments are fleeting, like dust devils spinning across the plains. But some sink claws into your soul and haunt your dreams for nights on end. What I'm about to share is no mere ghost story. It's a visceral, bone-deep experience that shook me to my core, one I feel compelled to tell. In these parts where old traditions tangle with fervent faith, spirituality, and whispers of witchcraft, the supernatural isn't just folklore, it's a living force. Out here, in the rural heart of New Mexico, ancient beliefs cling to the land like sagebrush. They're not just stories, they're as real as the red earth beneath your boots. These practices can bring comfort or unleash darkness, and in a place like this, where modernity hasn't fully taken hold, they shape the very fabric of our lives. I've always respected others' beliefs, so long as they harm no one. But last August, in the sweltering heat of a summer night, something tested the limits of everything I thought I knew. I was in the preparation room, finishing my work on Mr. Raymond Lopez, an elderly rancher whose heart had finally given out after years of toiling under the relentless desert sun. For me, embalming isn't just a job, it's a ritual, a final act of respect to honor the departed and ease the grief of those left behind. Whenever possible, I ask families for a photograph of the deceased, one that captures a moment of joy. It helps me restore a spark of life, a precious memory for the farewell. A good goodbye, I've learned through bitter experience, softens the sting of loss, even if just a little. I was putting the final touches on Mr. Lopez when Marcus, the young assistant at the mortuary, burst in, pale as a ghost, and pushing a gurney draped in a black shroud. His hands trembled and his eyes darted nervously, avoiding mine. "What's this?" I asked, puzzled by the secrecy. Marcus didn't answer at first. He maneuvered the gurney toward one of the refrigerated niches with a clumsiness that betrayed his nerves. "It's an older woman," he mumbled, his voice barely a whisper, as he shoved the gurney into the niche with desperate haste. He slammed the door shut, shaking his hands as if he'd touched something foul. "Marcus, what's wrong with you?" I snapped, irritated by his lack of respect. "That's someone's mother, someone's grandmother. Show some dignity." "It's not disgust, Oscar," he said, his voice a trembling thread, his eyes fixed on the floor. "It's fear." "Fear?" I raised an eyebrow. "Of what?" He hesitated, then whispered, "I don't know if you believe in this stuff, Oscar, but that woman was a bruja." The word didn't faze me at first. I'd heard plenty of stories growing up in a small town near Santa Fe, tales of witches who could shift into coyotes or owls, stalking the night for their own purposes. Some said they protected their communities, others claimed they stole livestock or cursed the unwary. To me, those were just campfire tales, colorful folklore to spook kids. I've always been a man of science, grounded in what I can see and touch. The paranormal moments I'd experienced before. Tricks of a tired mind, nothing more. But Marcus's fear was contagious, and his next words sent a shiver down my spine. "The family insisted we leave her covered with that black cloth," he stammered. "They said to cremate her with it, and with whatever she's holding in her hands." I pressed him for details, but he was already halfway out the door, muttering that the woman's daughter-in-law was still in the office. His panic left a heavy silence in its wake, broken only by the hum of the refrigeration units. Curiosity gnawed at me, sharp and insistent. I headed to the front office, where I found a woman in her 50s, dressed in stark black mourning clothes, about to leave. "Ma'am," I said politely, "are you related to the woman we just received?" She turned slowly, her dark eyes piercing through me as if she could see into my thoughts. Her gaze was unnerving, like a hawk sizing up its prey. "Yes," she said curtly. "If you'd like, I can prepare her for a viewing before the cremation," I offered. "It might help with closure." She shrugged, her expression cold as stone. "Do what you want. We don't care. Just cremate her." Her indifference hit me like a slap. "It's more for you and your family," I said, trying to keep my tone gentle. "If you have a photo or some clothes she loved, I can make her look." "She's already dressed," the woman cut me off, her voice sharp and commanding. "Cremate her as she is, with the cloth and what she's holding." The finality in her tone was chilling, unnatural. A coldness settled over me, deeper than the chill of the mortuary's coolers. What was so special about that black cloth? And what was the woman clutching so tightly? Why the rush to burn her without a proper goodbye? The questions swirled in my mind as the woman gave a curt nod and left, her footsteps echoing in the empty reception area. Back in the preparation room, unease coiled in my gut. I approached the niche where Marcus had stashed the body. The word bruja echoed in my head, stirring memories of my grandmother's stories from my childhood in Santa Fe. She'd spoken of witches who could shed their human skin, transforming into animals to roam the night. Some said their power came from ancient pacts, others from bloodlines steeped in magic. If you burned their human skin while they were transformed, the stories went, they'd die. Darker tales whispered of witches who fed on souls, leaving only husks behind. I'd always dismissed these as superstition, a way to explain the unexplainable. But now, standing before that sealed niche, a creeping dread challenged my skepticism. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with an electric tension that prickled my skin. My hands shook as I slid open the niche door. The darkness inside seemed to pulse, thicker than it should have been. I took a deep breath and gently pulled back the black cloth. The woman's face was gaunt, etched with deep wrinkles, yet serene in a way that felt wrong. But it wasn't her face that stopped my heart, it was the cloth. It wasn't a simple shroud. Intricate symbols were embroidered across it. Swirling spirals that seemed to writhe under my gaze, stylized animals, coyotes, owls, snakes, and glyphs that belonged to no language I knew. Her hands, crossed over her chest, clutched a strange object with unnatural strength. A crudely carved wooden doll, its surface dark and polished. Its eyes, two obsidian beads, gleamed with an unsettling intensity, and its carved mouth twisted into a sinister smirk. The doll radiated something, a subtle, malevolent energy I could feel through my gloves. A loud thud echoed from the adjacent preparation room where I'd been working on Mr. Lopez. I spun around, heart pounding, but saw nothing. Just the pipe settling, I told myself, though doubt gnawed at me. I turned back to the woman and her doll. A sudden gust of icy air, impossible in the controlled environment of the mortuary, swept through the room, lifting the edges of the cloth. The fluorescent lights flickered, plunging the room into brief darkness before buzzing back to life. A faint whisper, barely audible, seemed to rise from the cloth's symbols, a chilling murmur that tightened every muscle in my body. Then a metallic clang rang out from the other room, sharp and unmistakable. Something had fallen. The door between the rooms, which I knew I'd closed, creaked open slowly, revealing a void of shadow. Fear, raw, primal fear, clamped down on me. This wasn't just a body. This wasn't just a doll. Whatever this woman was, whatever she held, it was more than human. Outside, the night was a black abyss. Through the window, I caught sight of a lean, black dog with glowing eyes prowling near the entrance, an oddity in this quiet town. Then a flock of owls erupted into the sky, their screeches slicing through the silence as they circled the building before vanishing into the dark. My heart thundered as I turned back to the gurney. The woman, the Bruja, was sitting upright. Her eyes, once closed, now stared straight at me, her face twisted in a grimace of pain or rage. A scream caught in my throat, my rational mind shattered. This couldn't be real. I stumbled back, gasping for air, and blinked. When I looked again, she was lying down, the black cloth draped over her once more. A trick of the mind, I told myself, but the image burned into my brain. The lights flickered violently, plunging the room into darkness for what felt like an eternity. When they buzzed back on, I was frozen, my breath ragged, calling for Marcus in a hoarse whisper. He appeared in the doorway, his face ashen. He didn't need to ask what I'd seen. The terror in my eyes mirrored his own. "Help me," I croaked. Despite his fear, Marcus didn't hesitate. Together, we wheeled the gurney to the cremation chamber. The air grew heavier with each step, as if an unseen presence followed us. We slid the body into the furnace, and Marcus slammed the door shut, activating the system. The roar of the flames filled the room, a cleansing fire, or so I thought. Then we heard its screams, piercing, otherworldly shrieks that cut through the roar of the fire. Frantic pounding echoed from inside the furnace, as if something or someone was fighting to escape. It was impossible. I'd seen her lifeless body. But the sounds were undeniable, a torment that clawed at my sanity. I lunged for the control panel, desperate to stop the process, but Marcus grabbed my arm, his grip like iron. "No, Oscar," he said, his voice steady despite his pallor. "Let it burn. Some things are better left to the fire. You don't know what she was." His words stopped me cold. The screams and pounding continued, a horrific symphony that seared itself into my memory. Then, as suddenly as they began, they stopped. Silence fell, broken only by the soft crackle of the dying flames. Hours later, we opened the furnace. The heat still lingered, but the ashes were typical fine gray dust. But in the center, untouched by the inferno, was the wooden doll. Not a scorch mark on it, its obsidian eyes glinting mockingly. Marcus and I stared, our fear mirrored in each other's faces. It was impossible. The furnace's heat should have reduced everything to ash. We collected the ashes, doll and all, and placed them in an urn. We notified the family, but no one came, not the daughter-in-law, not a single soul. Weeks turned to months, and the urn sits on a shelf in the funeral home, a silent reminder of that night. The doll's carved smile haunts me, a symbol of the moment my world unraveled, when the line between life and death dissolved into something far darker. My name is Officer Emily Carter, and this is my story, my confession, recorded for whoever's out there listening. I don't know if you'll believe me, but I need to tell it. I need to get it out before it festers any longer inside me. This happened in the early hours of a cold November night in 2024, in a rundown neighborhood on the outskirts of El Paso, Texas. I was 3 months into my patrol duties with the El Paso PD, partnered with a grizzled veteran, Officer Daniel Ruiz. That night changed me. It changed everything. It was around 2:30 in the morning when the radio crackled to life, shattering the heavy silence of our patrol car. Unit 307, copy. We've got a 1016 domestic disturbance, possible violence at 24 Cedar Lane, Southside. Screams reported. Respond immediately. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Ruiz, slouched in the driver's seat, let out a tired groan, adjusting his bulletproof vest. "Another couple going at it," he muttered, flicking on the siren and lights. "You think it's serious?" I asked, my voice betraying my nerves. He glanced at me, his eyes shadowed under the dim streetlights. "Probably just some shoving, maybe a few bruises. Same old story in these parts of Southside. Drunks, drugs, desperation. You'll get used to it, rookie." The streets of Southside were a maze of cracked asphalt and flickering streetlights. The houses were squat, made of cinder block, with rusted bars on the windows and tin roofs that rattled in the desert wind. Cedar Lane was a narrow alley, barely wide enough for our cruiser. Number 24 stood out, its front door wide open, spilling a sickly yellow light onto the porch. 2 elderly neighbors stood outside, their faces grim, barely illuminated by the faint glow of a dying street lamp. They'd called it in, whispering about screams and something wrong in the air. I gripped my flashlight tighter, my pulse quickening. "This doesn't feel right," I said under my breath. Ruiz nodded, his hand resting on his holster. "Stay sharp, Carter," he said, and we stepped inside. The house was suffocatingly quiet, the kind of silence that feels like it's pressing down on you. A single bulb swung lazily in the living room, casting jagged shadows across the walls. Then I saw it blood. Dark, thick streaks smeared across the walls, pooling on the hardwood floor. A family portrait hung crookedly, the glass cracked, splitting the smiling face of a woman in half. My breath caught in my throat as I spotted the first body, a woman, maybe 30, sprawled on the floor. Her throat was torn open, her eyes wide with a terror so raw it made my skin crawl. I stifled a gasp, my hand shaking as I clutched my flashlight. "Jesus," I whispered. Ruiz's voice was low, steady, but I could hear the edge in it. "Stay calm, Carter. Check the kitchen. I'll head upstairs." The kitchen was a nightmare. Broken dishes littered the floor, a table overturned, half-eaten plates of rice and beans crusted over. Blood was everywhere, splattered like paint. But what stopped me cold was the refrigerator door. Scrawled in fresh blood was a symbol, a circle filled with twisted, claw-like shapes surrounding an eye and an inverted cross. The blood dripped into a black, congealed puddle on the floor. It wasn't random. It was deliberate, like some kind of ritual. My heart pounded as a scream tore through the house, Ruiz's voice, raw and panicked. "Carter, upstairs, now." I bolted up the stairs, my boots slipping on the blood-slick steps. In the kids' bedroom, the air felt wrong, heavy, like it was alive. 2 small bodies lay on a bunk bed, barely covered by blood-soaked blankets. The older boy, maybe 10, had his skull caved in, his face unrecognizable. The younger girl, no more than 6, had been carved open with surgical precision, her bones exposed in a way that was almost artistic. I gagged, my vision blurring. Ruiz stood in the corner, his gun trained on a man crouched in the shadows. "Get on the ground, you sick bastard," he shouted, his voice trembling with rage. The man was thin, shirtless, his skin slick with blood. His hands were swollen, knuckles shredded, and he was muttering something over and over like a prayer. It wasn't them. It wasn't them. They were things with faces, laughing. I spotted a driver's license on the bed. "Michael Alvarez," I read aloud, my voice shaking. He didn't respond, just kept murmuring. They were things, they spoke to me while I slept. Ruiz yanked him to his feet, cuffing him roughly. "You're done, you psycho," he growled. "You're gonna rot for this." Michael didn't resist. His eyes were empty, like he wasn't even there. We dragged him downstairs, past the bodies, the symbols, the stench of blood and decay. Outside, the neighborhood was eerily silent. No one came out to gawk or cry. Just one old woman, crossing the street, made the sign of the cross without looking at us. "That man ain't crazy," she muttered. "He opened the wrong door, been messing with things he shouldn't." Ruiz ignored her, but her words sent a chill down my spine. Backup arrived, and the radio barked orders to take Michael straight to lockup, no detours. Ruiz's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Let's go, Carter. This one's gonna be a mess." I whispered a quick prayer, earning a scowl from Ruiz. Michael sat in the back, cuffed, staring out the window, muttering, "It's coming again, it's coming for me." I glanced at him in the rearview mirror, and for a split second, his eyes didn't look human, hollow, black like pits. My stomach twisted, a primal fear clawing at me. The streets of El Paso felt empty, but not peaceful. The air was thick, oppressive, like something was watching us. The dashboard lights flickered, and I swear I saw symbols flash across the screen, circles, claws, impossible shapes that seemed to move even after they vanished. Then Michael spoke, his voice different, deeper, like it wasn't his. "Sherma, El Trocatchalia," Ruiz snapped. "What the hell did you say?" Michael's body shook, his eyes rolled back, and a trickle of dark saliva dripped from his mouth. The air in the car turned freezing, the rearview mirror fogging up from the inside. A high-pitched whine filled the cabin, like the radio was picking up a signal it shouldn't. Michael's head snapped up, his eyes black as oil, and he smiled, a smile that wasn't human. "You want to know why I did it?" he said, his voice smooth, almost musical, but laced with something vile. "It wasn't rage. It wasn't madness. It was an offering." Ruiz's face twisted with anger. "Shut your mouth," he snarled, but Michael kept going, his gaze locking onto mine. "Have you ever felt something so pure it makes you tremble? Touched the soul of a dark god while holding a warm throat in your hands?" "I have. Tonight I was free." My stomach churned, but I couldn't look away. His words were like poison seeping into me. "My wife begged as I cut her open with the kitchen knife," he continued. Her voice warped, like the flesh itself was screaming. It filled me with warmth. He was there behind me, his fingers in my spine, guiding me, whispering words I'd never heard but understood. Ruiz slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a stop. He jumped out, cursing, his hands shaking as he gripped his gun. I could tell he wanted to drag Michael out and beat him senseless, but something stopped him. He climbed back in, silent, and floored it toward lockup. Michael didn't stop. "My kids, so fragile, so easy to break. Do you know what's louder than a bone snapping? The sound of a soul tearing. I felt it when I dropped the hammer on my boy's head. The room filled with heat, with energy, like the air itself was alive. Mail rewarded me. He gave me vision. I carved my daughter's body into his image, her bones, and flesh his canvas. It was beautiful. I squeezed my eyes shut, but the images were already there, the blood, the symbols, the bodies. His words were so vivid, so devoid of remorse, it hurt to hear them. He laughed, low and guttural. I'd do it again. Every cut was a prayer. My kids didn't die, they were my offering. Ruiz braked again, his gun drawn, trembling. "What did you see?" I asked, noticing the terror in his eyes. He shook his head, saying nothing, but I saw it fear, real fear, for the first time. "Just a few more blocks," he muttered, speeding up. Michael's voice dropped to a whisper. "You won't make it. She's here. She came with us. You're the prisoners now, locked in with me. Funny how you cling to your rules, handcuffs, cars, laws. None of it stops her." Blood began to drip from the seat beneath him, like the car itself was bleeding. I screamed, but he just closed his eyes and exhaled, murmuring, Mail, she's awake." We passed under a bridge, and the interior lights flickered out. The clock read 3:33. Michael was gone from the mirror. The car felt heavier, like something was sitting with us. Ruiz was sweating, his knuckles white on the wheel. The streetlights blinked out one by one behind us, plunging the road into darkness. Michael laughed again, a sound that crawled up from somewhere deep and wrong. "She's here," he said. "The one who walks in the blinks, who devours reason. Mail." The radio wailed, not static, but cries, fragments of voices pleading in a language I couldn't understand. The dashboard screen flickered, showing a shadow figure with outstretched arms, no face, just darkness. I screamed again, and Ruiz slammed the brakes. We stopped at a red light, its glow pulsing like a heartbeat. The world was silent, no cars, no wind, just our ragged breathing. "Get him out," Ruiz growled, his voice breaking. I turned to the back seat, and my blood ran cold. Michael was gone. The handcuffs hung open, dripping blood, but the doors were locked, the windows intact. No sign of a struggle, just an acrid smell like burnt metal and rotting meat. Ruiz swept his flashlight over the car, and we saw it, carved into the back of the front seat, as if by claws, was a spiral with an eye in the center. Below it, in blood, one word, Mail. I heard a rustle behind me and spun around, nothing. The streetlights were dead, the traffic light dark. The night had swallowed everything. Ruiz got back in, his hands shaking, and drove without a word. I could hear his breathing, ragged, like he was holding back sobs. The report was filed, but it was a lie. Detainee Michael Alvarez missing from custody, cause undetermined. The dashcam footage was corrupted, showing only static and a low hum that made the tech sick. The GPS cut out for 11 minutes that night, 11 minutes where Michael vanished. Ruiz quit 2 days later. Rumors said he joined a cult or hung himself or just left town. No one knows. He was erased, no digital trace beyond that night. I lasted 2 more weeks. I didn't talk about it, couldn't, but I wasn't the same. My eyes were sunken, my hands shook. I'd stop at mirrors, staring, waiting for something to stare back. One night, I locked myself in my apartment and recorded this. "He didn't escape," I said into the mic, my voice cracking. "He spread. Something stuck to us that night in our skin, in our dreams. I see a hallway now, endless, with symbols on the walls, doors that scream when they open. The sacrifice didn't end with his family. It's in us now." I stopped recording, but I heard it, a whisper not mine from the shadows. SH mail. Days later, I was gone. My apartment was locked from the inside, bed made, no signs of a fight. Just a circle drawn in ash and blood on the floor, an eye in the center, and words on the wall in something dark. "Now I see through you." If you're listening, you've heard her name. SH mail walks in the blinks, in the silence between heartbeats. Say it in front of a mirror in the dark and something will look back. I don't know if I'm dead or just open, but you've heard her now. The door's cracked. Be careful what you let in. This is Emily Carter signing off. If you liked this episode, subscribe, hit the bell, and share. Find me on socials as Eddie Lennon at Horrorcast for more stories to keep you up at night. Until next time. Welcome back to another chilling night with Radio Macabre, your favorite late-night show, broadcasting from a creaky old studio, overlooking the misty shores of Puget Sound, Washington. I'm your host, Ethan Carver, and tonight, we've got a story that's less a tale and more a confession, a raw, unsettling glimpse into the shadows. It's about ghosts, sure, but it's also about what happens when they vanish and what someone might do to bring them back. Tonight's episode is called How to Make a Ghost, and it's coming to you exclusively on Radio Macabre, tunes and tales that'll scare you to death. Let's dive in. My name's Sarah, and I live in a small, weathered apartment building in Tacoma, just a stone's throw from the waterfront, where the fog rolls in thick and heavy most nights. It's been over 2 weeks since I last saw Lily. That's strange, because her anniversary is coming up. Every year, her family comes to lay flowers at the little memorial they set up on the median of Pacific Avenue, right where that awful car crash took her. It's not exactly a birthday, but those of us who knew her, those of us who still know her, treat it like one. We celebrate her, in a way. When summer hits, with its sticky heat and sudden rainstorms, you can almost see her. Lily's faint, translucent figure drifts along the street, playing tricks on drivers at night, flickering in their headlights at the corner of 21st and Pacific. She's caused a fender bender or two, I swear. But lately, nothing. No glimpses, no whispers, not even that cold shiver down your spine. Even her old tabby cat, Rusty, has been acting strange, prowling the alleys like he knows something we don't. I'm certain Lily can't leave that spot. Don't ask me how I know. It's just a gut feeling, bone deep. But what's got me worried is the thought that someone's doing something to keep her away. I don't want to sound paranoid, but the new couple in apartment 3B, the ones who keep talking about blessing the building with their sage and prayers. I'm starting to think they did something when no one was looking. If they did, it won't last. The flowers in the community garden out front are wilting. But once they bloom again, I'm sure Lily will be back. Now, speaking of ghosts, I've got a story for you tonight that feels more like a confession than anything else. Our storyteller wants to stay anonymous, and when you hear this, you'll understand why. Here it is, straight from the shadows. At first, I was terrified. I'm not going to lie. Shadows would dart across my hallway in the dead of night. Whispers floated from the kitchen at 3 in the morning, like someone was murmuring secrets just out of earshot. Doors would creak shut on their own, even when the windows were closed tight. For the first few months in this old Tacoma apartment, I could barely sleep. I'd leave the TV on, volume low, and pull the blankets over my head, convinced that if I couldn't see them, they couldn't see me. But then something shifted. I don't know how to explain it, but I got used to them. More than that, I started to wait for them. There was something oddly comforting about knowing I wasn't alone in this creaky, drafty place. They didn't talk to me, didn't demand anything. They were just there. Shadows slipping past, soft noises in the dark. It felt like they were watching out for me, keeping me from falling apart. I got to know their routines. One would brush past the bathroom mirror every night at 2:10 sharp, like clockwork. Another would nudge the closet door shut after I went to bed. And there was a woman, I think it was a woman, cry softly in the living room, but only when the rain tapped against the windows. I never saw them face to face, but I knew they were there, and they knew I knew. It was our little unspoken deal. That's why it hurts so much now. They're gone. It's been weeks since I've heard a whisper, felt a cold spot, or seen a shadow move. The doors stay open. The air doesn't shift. My apartment feels empty, like it's holding its breath. Dead. I'm starting to think someone took them away. There's this neighbor, Karen, who lives downstairs. She's always muttering prayers under her breath, clutching her rosary like it's a lifeline. A while back, she gave me this weird look and said, "Don't worry, honey, we're gonna clean this place up." I thought she meant the peeling paint or the grime in the stairwell. Now I'm not so sure. I think she brought in one of those people, you know, the ones who burn sage and chant about cleansing spirits. My ghosts weren't hurting anyone. They were mine. Now I'm back to feeling like I did before. Alone, silent. The hum of the fridge is louder than it should be. Everything feels fake, sterile. I can't sleep, but not because I'm scared. It's because I'm sad. And because a part of me is terrified that if I don't bring them back, something worse is going to happen. Last night I tried talking to them. I sat on the bathroom floor in the dark, no lights, just me and the echo of my own voice. I whispered, like I didn't want to wake them. I told them I miss them, that I don't care if I can't see them, that I'm not afraid anymore. I need them to come back. Sitting there, hugging my knees to my chest, I spilled everything. I told them how I know what it's like to be left behind. My dad walked out when I was 6, started a new family across town, like I was a rough draft he could crumple up and toss. Then there was Jake, who swore he loved me one day and disappeared the next. No fight, no goodbye, just gone. That's how it always is. People leave me, erase me, like I never mattered. But my ghosts, they were different. They didn't ask for anything, no love, no promises. They just were. And that was enough. They were the only ones who didn't abandon me, who made this rundown apartment feel like more than just walls and a leaky faucet. Maybe that's why it cuts so deep that they're gone. It's like admitting that even the dead don't want to stick around me. But last night, as I lay in bed, something made me sit up. It wasn't a sound, it was heavier, like a presence pressing down on the room. Not like my ghosts. This was different, darker, like a shadow that doesn't just move, it watches. Now I can't shake the thought. They didn't leave. Something took them. And I don't think it's just some overzealous neighbor with a sage bundle. I think it's something worse. A demon, maybe. Something Karen and her prayer group stirred up with their half-baked rituals. Something that feeds on the dead, that swallowed my ghosts whole. That's why the air feels so clean but so wrong, like a room that's been scrubbed of life. And if that thing took my ghosts, what's next? Me. I feel it sometimes, behind the bathroom mirror when I'm brushing my teeth, or in the black screen of the TV when it's off. It's quiet, waiting, like it's sizing me up. But I'm not going down without a fight. Before it comes for me, I'm going to fill this place with spirits. I'll tie souls to these walls, make it so crowded that thing will have to claw its way through to get to me. I read somewhere that for a ghost to stick around, they need a sudden, tragic death, something so fast they don't realize they're gone. That's how you make a ghost. So if my ghosts aren't coming back, I'll make my own. I won't be alone again. Never again. That's her story, folks. I won't ask what you think, because I suspect we all know what she's planning. But let me leave you with this. No matter how many times life lets you down, don't give in to the gnawing beast of loneliness. Don't cling to ghosts for company. I don't want to see your name in the headlines for making a terrible choice. Join me next week for more Radio Macabre, where the stories and the scares never stop. Good night. It was a warm August night in El Paso, Texas, the kind where the desert air clings to your skin even after sunset. My mom ran a small taco stand out of our garage, serving late-night workers who needed a quick bite. Teresa, her friend, was one of her regulars. She'd swing by after her shift at the warehouse, usually around 9, tapping on the kitchen window to let us know she was there. Mom always saved her a plate birria tamales, whatever was left from the day's sales. "Don't charge her," Mom would say, winking. "That's what friends do. Besides, it's just leftovers." That night I got home late from playing basketball at the community center, my sneakers still dusty from the court. The house was quiet, too quiet, and a note on the fridge caught my eye. Mom's handwriting, "Had to run out, emergency. If Teresa comes, give her the plate in the fridge." I sighed, tossing my bag on the couch, when a soft tap 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 came from the window. My heart jumped not from fear, but because I wasn't expecting it so soon. I shuffled over, expecting Teresa's usual tired smile, but when I slid the window open, her face looked off. Pale, almost gray, like she'd been standing in the cold too long. "Hey, can you make me a coffee?" she asked, her voice shaky. "It's freezing out here, and they wouldn't give me anything where I was." Her teeth chattered, which was weird. August in El Paso doesn't get that cold. "You want to come in?" I offered, trying to shake the unease creeping up my spine. She nodded, and I went to open the front door, peering out into the dark street. The porch light flickered, but there was no one there, no Teresa, no shadow, nothing. I frowned, closing the door, thinking maybe she'd walked around back. But when I turned, there she was, standing in the middle of the living room. Barefoot, silent, wrapped in a faint chill that seemed to radiate from her. My stomach dropped. How'd she get in? Through the window, I didn't ask. Instead, I mumbled something about getting her coffee and bolted to the kitchen. I grabbed a pot, filled it with water, and scooped some instant coffee into a mug, my hands moving on autopilot. Teresa kept muttering about how they wouldn't give her coffee, her voice distant, like she was talking to someone else. I rummaged through a drawer for bandages. Her hands looked scratched up, raw, and grabbed a blanket from the hall closet. When I came back, she was still there, standing like a statue, her eyes fixed on nothing. I handed her the blanket and bandages, trying to make small talk to ease the tension. "You okay, Teresa? What happened out there?" She didn't answer, just clutched the blanket tighter. The water on the stove hissed, and I hurried back to pour the coffee, careful not to burn myself. When I returned, mug in hand, something had changed. Teresa was still standing, but now the blanket was draped over her, covering her from head to toe. She wasn't moving, not a twitch, not a breath. It was like the air in the room had thickened, pressing against my skin. "Teresa," I called, my voice barely above a whisper. No response. I stepped closer, the mug trembling in my hand. "You good? This isn't funny." Silence. The room felt heavier, like it was holding its breath. I reached out, about to nudge her, when a deafening crash shattered the quiet. The kitchen window exploded inward, glass scattering across the floor, the wind howling like it had a vendetta. I spun around, heart pounding, and when I looked back, the blanket was falling, crumpling to the floor in slow motion. Empty. No Teresa. Just the blanket, pooling where her face should have been. I froze, my mind racing. Had she slipped out, hidden somewhere? I checked the kitchen, the bathroom, every corner of the house, but she was gone. For 20 minutes I stood there, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it. What the hell just happened? I grabbed a broom, sweeping up the glass, my hands shaking. That's when the front door creaked open, and Mom walked in, her face pale, eyes red-rimmed. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, clutching her purse. Finally, she whispered, "Guess who died?" "Teresa," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop it, heavy with a certainty I didn't understand. Mom's eyes widened. "How'd you know?" "She was here," I said, my voice cracking. "Just now. Said she was cold, asked for coffee." Mom crossed herself, tears spilling down her cheeks. "That's why I was out," she said. "They just brought her body back for the wake. I was picking up coffee to take to her family." The air went still, and the weight of her words sank in. Teresa wasn't coming back, not for coffee, not for anything. When my parents got married, they moved to the outskirts of Juarez, Mexico, against my grandparents' wishes. They didn't approve of Dad, said he was trouble. So Mom and Dad packed up and started fresh in a dusty neighborhood on the edge of the city, where the streets were unpaved, and electricity flickered like it had a mind of its own. That's where I was born, where we grew up. Mom always talked about those early days, how the people there kept to themselves, faces hard as the desert ground. I was too young to notice, but she said it hit her right away. Everyone seemed to carry a weight, like they were all in mourning. We'd been there maybe 2 weeks when Mom started piecing it together. Black ribbons hung on doors, women wore dark veils that hid their eyes, and the air felt heavy, not just from the summer rains, but from something deeper. One evening, a neighbor, an older woman with a sharp tongue, finally told her what was going on. The week before we arrived, the neighborhood had been through hell. 7 people died in a single week. Not accidents, not illness. Murder. One man, a kid really, had broken into a house in the dead of night and killed 6 people, a family caught off guard. Some were asleep, others barely had time to fight. By morning, the house was a graveyard, the door swinging open, bodies scattered across the floor. A week later, they found him. He didn't hide, didn't run. He opened his door like he'd been waiting for them, a twisted smile on his face. He confessed to every detail, where he stood, how they fell, without a hint of remorse. Before they could drag him to the authorities, a friend of the family he'd slaughtered put a bullet in his back. Justice, they called it. His mother, though, insisted on a wake. She laid his body out in their living room, cleaned him up, and left the door open for anyone to come pay respects. No one did. The neighbors gathered across the street, whispering, judging. "Where's the father?" they muttered. "She raised a monster. She paid the price." Mom heard the rumors later, pieced together from hushed conversations. The kid's mother was young when it happened, 16, maybe 17. She'd come back from the hills one night, clothes torn, eyes empty, claiming something attacked her. Not a man, she said, but something. Half the neighborhood believed her, the other half called her crazy. 9 months later, she had the boy. He was different from the start, not just mischievous, but wrong. At 5, he was caught strangling a stray cat, watching it writhe. At 8, he plucked a chicken's feathers to watch it crash into walls. By 10, he was tossing dogs off cliffs, laughing as they fell. People whispered about his eyes, cold, empty, like they belonged to something else. By 16, he'd done the unthinkable. The wake was a formality, a mother's desperate attempt to mourn a son no one else could. I was just a kid then, but I remember that night, sneaking out to see what the adults were whispering about. From across the street, I saw the body laid out on the floor, surrounded by empty plastic chairs. No one went inside, but they watched, waiting for something to happen. Then it did. Men started arriving, 5 or 6 of them, all about the same age as the dead kid, all with a strange resemblance, same sharp jaw, same hollow stare. They walked into the house, calm as you please, and told the mother they were his brothers. Half-brothers, they said. The crowd outside froze. The mother, too shocked to question it, let them in. She went to the kitchen to get them water, but when she came back, they were gone. So was the body. They'd carried it out, effortless, like it weighed nothing, and headed toward the hills. I followed, or tried to, staying low behind the scrub brush. The mother trailed them, screaming for them to stop, but no one helped her. The neighbors just watched, silent, as she chased after her son's body. I lost sight of them in the dark, but hours later she came back alone, her face pale as moonlight. She told a neighbor what she'd seen, and word spread like wildfire. She followed them to a clearing in the hills, guided by a faint orange glow. A fire. Around it, those men, those brothers, were crouched, tearing into something with their hands. The sounds weren't human, not voices, not laughter, but the wet crunch of jaws on bone. She saw her son's body, or what was left of it, in the center. They were eating him, ripping flesh from bone under the flicker of the flames. She didn't scream, didn't move. She backed away, stumbling through the dark, and ran home. By morning, she'd locked herself inside, and no one saw her again. The men, the body, the fire, they were gone, like they'd never been there at all. Last summer, my best friend Archero drowned during a family trip to Lake Tahoe. They pulled his body from the water almost immediately, but it was too late. Paramedics worked on him for what felt like an eternity, but he was gone. His family paid for a special transport to bring him back to Reno, Nevada, where we lived. I found out the moment they got to town and rushed to their house to help, to be there for them in any way I could. The funeral home, a quiet place on the edge of downtown, had already prepared his body and laid him out in one of their viewing rooms. About 30 minutes after they placed him in the casket, something impossible happened. Archero sat up. Not slowly, not gently, but with a sharp jerk, like something had pulled him upright. His back arched, his neck twitched, and his fingers trembled before he gripped the sides of the casket and pulled himself into a sitting position. The room froze. No one screamed. It wasn't that kind of fear. It was the kind that pins you in place, makes you question reality. We all knew bodies could twitch after death, muscles firing one last time, but this wasn't that. Archero was awake. He looked around, his eyes glassy, and asked for help getting out of the casket. No one moved. We couldn't. He'd been declared dead twice, once at the lake, again when they brought him here. 6 hours had passed since they pulled him from the water. His voice was rough, complaining of a piercing pain in his head, like his skull was being squeezed from the inside. His lungs, he said, burned like they were filled with embers, and his joints felt stiff, like rusted hinges. The air around him carried a strange smell, not of death, but of rotting flowers, sharp and unnatural. People from other viewing rooms started crowding in, whispering about a miracle. Jake, one of Archero's friends who always acted like he knew everything, started talking about suspended animation, how the heart can slow to a near stop, mimicking death. Maybe, but the air in the room felt wrong, thick with something heavier than grief. His aunts were sobbing, caught between mourning and disbelief, even though he was sitting right there, alive. Archero turned to me, his face pale under the funeral makeup, lips gray, eyes sunken. 2 wilted roses were still tucked into his suit jacket, drooping against the fabric. When I was drowning, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, I knew I was going to die. The pressure in my chest, it felt like my lungs would explode. Then everything went dark. Next thing I knew, I was on a beach, but not Tahoe. It was empty, just gray sand stretching forever under a sky with no color. No sun, no stars, just white, gray, black. I was there for months, maybe 3, where day and night blurred into one. And the only sound was a faint wind that carried no scent. I shivered, his words painting a picture I didn't want to see. Jake chimed in, saying it sounded like a near-death experience, visions from the edge of life. But Archero's eyes were distant, like he was still half in that place. The room grew quiet, everyone waiting for him to say more, to explain how he was here, alive. Then he stiffened, his gaze snapping to a corner of the room. Who's that? He asked, his voice sharp with fear. Who's she? I turned, but the corner was empty, just shadows and a potted plant. There's no one there, man, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Maybe you're tired, want some water. He shook his head, his eyes locked on the empty space. She's tall, too tall, her head S. Wrong, too big like it doesn't fit her body. Her face, it's not human. Flat like a mask, no real features, just hollows where eyes should be. She's standing there, staring at me. I glanced again. Nothing. But the way he described her sent a chill down my spine. His body language screamed fear, shoulders hunched, eyes wide, tracking something moving closer. I tried to rationalize it. Oxygen deprivation, brain damage, trauma. Anything to keep my own panic at bay. Then I heard it, a voice, cold and slow, like it was seeping through the walls. It didn't come from any one direction, just floated above us, clear as day. "You slipped away from me this time," it said, "but I'll see you soon." My blood turned to ice. I froze, my heart pounding so hard I thought it'd burst. I looked around, desperate to find the source, but there was nothing, just the same empty corner, the same silent crowd. Everyone was staring at the same spot Archero was fixated on, but no one saw anything. Then the glass door of the viewing room swung open, hard, like someone had shoved it. A gust of wind tore through the room, rattling the windows and shaking the trees outside for a long, endless 15 seconds. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The air went still, and the weight in the room lifted, like whatever had been there was gone. Archero collapsed back onto the couch, trembling. No one spoke. We all knew what we'd felt, even if we couldn't see it. And I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had spoken to him wasn't done with him yet. I used to work the front desk at a funeral home in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Got the job through a friend from my book club, of all places. I thought I wouldn't last a week. Handling grief, death, and all that comes with it isn't exactly light work. But after a while, you get used to it. You see things, hear things, and eventually you stop jumping at every shadow. The dead, they carry something with them, stories, regrets, sometimes more. I learned to talk about it like it was normal because, in that place, it was. One night around midnight, I was stuck at the funeral home. My car had broken down, and Dad couldn't pick me up, so I decided to crash in the employee dorm, a small room tucked behind the offices, past the break room and lockers. I was just settling in, fluffing the thin pillow, when someone knocked on the door. Not a casual tap, but an urgent, insistent pounding. I opened it to find an older woman, her face tight with frustration. "Someone's messing with us," she said. "They keep banging on the door in the viewing room. You need to do something." I wasn't security, just a receptionist, but I grabbed my keys and followed her. The funeral home was quiet at that hour, the kind of quiet that feels like it's watching you. As I walked into the viewing room, every eye turned to me, expectant, like I was supposed to fix whatever was happening. The room was heavy with grief, the air thick with the scent of lilies and candle wax. Then I heard it, a rhythmic thudding coming from the main wall, where a heavy wooden door sat next to a small altar and a cross. It sounded like someone was trying to break through. The woman pointed. "That's it. They've been at it for 10 minutes like they want to get in." I crossed the room, my keys jangling, and unlocked the door. It led to a storage closet, nothing but folding chairs, tablecloths, and the sound system's console. I swung it open, half expecting to find a prankster, but it was empty. The banging stopped the second I turned the key. I muttered an apology on behalf of the funeral home, feeling foolish for apologizing for something I couldn't explain. As I passed the casket, I glanced at the body. A young woman, her face fixed in an expression that wasn't peaceful. It was wrong, like she was grimacing, her lips twisted in a way the embalmers shouldn't have allowed. I reached for my phone, instinct telling me to snap a picture for the manager, but I stopped myself. Her husband and mother were standing guard on either side of the casket, their faces heavy with sorrow. I couldn't disrespect them like that. They approached me with some administrative question I couldn't answer, so I promised to send the office manager over in the morning. As I turned to leave, I noticed a woman leaning against the wall, apart from the family. She was young, blonde, her posture stiff. Suddenly, she arched backward, like someone had yanked her hair. Her hand shot to her scalp, and when she pulled it away, a clump of blonde strands was tangled in her fingers. She bit back a scream, her eyes wide with shock. I hurried out, my heart racing, and headed to the vending machine for a bottle of water to calm my nerves. That's when I heard footsteps in the hallway. The blonde woman was walking toward me, arm in arm with the dead woman's husband. The tension between them was electric, not grief but something else, guilt maybe. She hissed at him, "It was stupid to bring me here. It's too soon. Everyone knows, even your damn dead wife." My stomach churned. I didn't look at them, but I knew who'd pulled her hair. The next morning, I told my manager, Tom, what happened. He raised an eyebrow, surprised I'd lasted 4 months without this kind of talk. "Pay attention," he said, almost casually. "You'll see weirder things." Then he told me about her, a woman who showed up at nearly every wake, always early, slipping in before the family cars arrived. Young, with straight dark hair, dressed in an old but pristine coat. She wasn't pushy, didn't draw attention, just existed like part of the ritual. No one questioned her, assuming she was someone's cousin or friend. But Tom had noticed her too many times. I started watching for her. Sure enough, I saw her, a Monday, then a Thursday, then a Sunday. She moved like she belonged, her presence calm but unsettling, like a shadow that didn't quite match its source. One evening, as the crowd filed out of a wake, I caught her at the reception desk. "I've seen you here a lot," I said, trying to sound friendly. "Almost like you work here." She turned, her eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "You really don't recognize me?" she asked, her voice soft but sharp. "You're not new. Don't you have keys to the basement?" My blood ran cold. She reached into an open drawer, pulled out my keyring, and flipped through it. "Yep, you've got the basement key. Let's go." She walked toward the elevator, and I followed, my heart pounding. The basement was where we stored supplies, sometimes bodies waiting for prep. I'd been down there before, but this felt different, like stepping into a dream I couldn't wake from. The elevator doors opened, and she led me to a metal freezer door. "Open it," she said, a faint smile playing on her lips like she was daring me. I clutched the key, my hand shaking, but I couldn't move. The air was too heavy, the silence too loud. "Fine," she said, turning away. "Stay curious." She walked back to the elevator, and as I started to follow, a sharp bang echoed from the other side of the freezer door, deliberate, like someone was knocking to be let out. I worked there for 6 more months before I quit. The fear faded, like it does for everyone in this line of work, but that sound, that knocking, stayed with me. It wasn't just the dead carrying their stories. Something else was down there, waiting, and I was glad I never opened that door. Good evening, my name is Jason Mendez, and I'm 34 years old. I live in Cedar Ridge, a small town in northern Oregon, in the Maplewood neighborhood. I've been working as a mechanic for 11 years now, but I've been fascinated by engines and machinery since I was 13 years old. This passion came from my father, who everyone called Big Mike, the Bear Mendez. He was a tall, powerfully built man who ran his own garage. I used to spend hours in his shop, watching him work on cars and motorcycles, learning everything I could because I found it absolutely fascinating. One particular evening stands out in my memory. My father was helping out an old friend of his named Ben Martinez. Ben had shown up with scratches and bruises all over his arms and knees, and his vintage Harley-Davidson was completely banged up, as if something terrible had happened to him. Ben was speaking to my father in hushed tones, saying, "I saw him, Mike. He was real. He was actually real." My curiosity got the better of me, and I asked who they were talking about. Both my father and Ben immediately changed the subject, and Dad asked me to go inside the house to fetch a specific wrench from his toolbox. By the time I returned, Ben had already left. When I pressed my father about their conversation, he brushed it off and asked me to help him with some routine maintenance work. I eventually forgot about the incident, but when Ben came back to pick up his motorcycle a few days later, I hid outside the garage, pretending to play while secretly listening to their conversation. I heard Ben say, "That damned thing not only nearly killed me, but also caused me enormous damage to my bike." My father responded, "Come on, Ben. You were drunk and seeing things. This whole ghost story nonsense is just something people make up to scare others." Ben became visibly irritated and replied, "If you don't believe me, that's your problem. Just don't say I didn't warn you when it happens to you." After that, he rode off on his Harley, and I was left burning with curiosity about what kind of story Ben had told my father. Since I knew Dad wouldn't tell me anything, I decided to go to Ben's house and ask him directly. When I told him I had overheard their conversation and wanted to know the story, he laughed and said, "You're quite the curious kid, aren't you? This kind of story isn't meant for children." I kept insisting, practically begging him to tell me. Finally, he relented and said, "All right, if you really want to know, I'll tell you." He poured himself a glass of orange juice, offered me one, and began his tale. As you know, I like to have a few drinks on my days off, but that night, I had way too much whiskey at Murphy's Tavern and had to head home earlier than usual. Since it was already 10:30 at night, I decided to take the shortcut that runs alongside the old logging road, cutting through the forest trail. That way, I wouldn't have to speed on the main road since I was already pretty buzzed. While I was riding through the woods, I started hearing footsteps coming from deep within the undergrowth. At first, I didn't think much of it, figured it was just some deer or maybe a raccoon. But then I began hearing a very faint voice beside me. I started getting scared and looking around frantically. That's when I saw someone running alongside me on the edge of the dirt path. My blood ran cold instantly. I could barely breathe. From what I could see, it looked like a man, but he seemed to be completely naked and running in this horrible, unnatural way. His speed was absolutely inhuman, something that would make any grown man wet himself with fear. I lost my balance from the shock and crashed hard onto the dirt road, getting badly scraped up. As soon as I managed to get back on my feet, all bruised and bloodied from the fall, I ran like I'd never run before, all the way home. I didn't go back for my motorcycle until the next morning. The locals say that those woods are haunted by the spirit of a very evil rancher. His name was Paul Guerrero. He owned a large cattle ranch back in the mid-1940s. His ranch wasn't huge initially, but seemingly overnight, he became incredibly wealthy and influential in the area. He was an extremely greedy man who literally worked his ranch hands to death. One dawn, several men he had fired to avoid paying their wages ambushed him in his ranch house while he was taking a bath. They beat him to death in a brutal lynching. They say that after he died, no one came forward to claim the land or the ranch. Since then, the property has been abandoned, and eventually disappeared back into the wilderness. People say that anyone who enters his territory is pursued by the ghost of its former owner. After finishing his story, Ben told me I should never, ever travel down that dirt road at night. I was terrified and promised him I would never do such a thing. Several years passed, and I never heard another story about the Phantom Rancher. However, just before my 24th birthday, my friend Kevin told me that he and some of his friends were planning to visit an old ranch house they had discovered deep in the woods. I immediately became curious and asked where this place was located. He told me it was down the old dirt logging road. Right away, I remembered the story Ben had told me years earlier. I warned Kevin that the place was haunted and told him Ben's entire story. Kevin looked at me skeptically and said he didn't believe in that kind of nonsense. He then invited me to celebrate my birthday with some drinks along with the gang inside the old ranch house. I told him it wasn't a good idea, but I was eventually convinced when he mentioned they had bought drinks specifically to celebrate my birthday. Besides, now that I was older, I didn't really believe in those things anymore either. He told me that same night at 9 o'clock, I should meet him and the gang at the dirt road with a screwdriver. I thought it was odd, but didn't give it much thought at the time. He also told me to bring a flashlight to help illuminate the place. That evening, I went to the dirt road and met up with Kevin, along with Lucas and Fabio. Lucas was carrying a case of beer, and Fabio had several more beers in his backpack. I asked Kevin if this was the tool he wanted, showing him the screwdriver. He nodded, saying, "Yeah, that's exactly what we need." Then he told us to head toward the ranch house. When we arrived, the place was completely overgrown with vegetation. Just seeing the place from the outside made me completely regret the idea, but I couldn't back out now, or I'd be the laughingstock of the group. The entrance was completely open. The front door appeared to have collapsed to the ground long ago. Inside the house, it smelled of mold and rotting wood. Kevin went into one of the rooms and brought out a metal box with several bolts on it. It had no lock and no obvious way to open it, just bolts and screws around its edges. He said I was going to open it. I asked him where he had found the box. He explained that a week earlier, when he first discovered the ranch house and explored it a bit, he saw this box underneath one of the floorboards. Since he couldn't open it then, he left it in the main room for when he returned. I was scared to open it, but my friends started insisting that I open the mysterious box. I began removing the bolts with great difficulty. Some were rusted stuck or just wouldn't budge. On the top section, I managed to remove more than half of them, which was enough to bend the box slightly and see what was inside. When we opened it, there was a strange object inside. It looked like a small clay statue of some kind of figure, phallic-shaped or something similar to that. Fabio, who was already pretty drunk, grabbed the statue and started making jokes with it. We all burst out laughing, and I even forgot all the tension I had been feeling. Suddenly, we heard the sound of something banging from the back of the house. Everyone went silent instantly. We pointed our flashlights toward the back, trying to see something. Just when things seemed to calm down, we saw a completely naked man running back and forth across the rear of the property. All of us jumped up and ran out screaming. Fabio threw the statue to me and grabbed Lucas's backpack with the beers. In the chaos and panic, we ended up getting separated, and I completely forgot I was carrying the statue. When I heard sounds and footsteps of someone running behind me, I threw that thing as far as I could and heard whatever was following me speak in a guttural, deep voice. "You're going to end up just like me, Jason." At that moment, I nearly had a heart attack. That thing somehow knew my name. Fortunately, I saw some flashlights ahead and heard my friends calling for me. As soon as I emerged from the undergrowth, I looked back and we all saw him, Paul Guerrero, staring at us with eyes that seemed to reflect with a small red light. When we pointed our flashlights at him, I threw the screwdriver at him, and as soon as it hit him, he disappeared like smoke before our very eyes. We didn't stay another second. We ran off, and each of us went to our respective homes. When I got home, I slammed the door shut, and my parents woke up asking what had happened. Noticing my condition, completely sweaty and out of breath, looking like someone who had seen a ghost, they tried to calm me down. I told my parents what had happened, but they didn't seem to believe me. Needless to say, I couldn't sleep that night. The next day, my friends and I talked about what happened that night and swore we would never return to those woods and wouldn't tell anyone about it. Today, I still live in the same place, and I'm a family man with my 4 children. My father has passed away, and I've taken over his business. Every now and then, when we get together to chat or catch up, we always remember that night. Anyway, that's my story. I hope you enjoyed it, and good night to everyone. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.